everyone has something to share in either wisdom, story, or logic, and it's clearly amazing to hear all the differing missing links discovered by people unique to their own journeys, and in how they have come to discover them. Together, we can help to build a bigger picture for a better future, for a brighter tomorrow. Let's stand united. Let's remove the veils and let's create a new world together. Are you that missing link? Join Jesse Hale on the Missing Link Talk Show as he helps to unveil the mystery through the unique wisdom and store of others.
Welcome everybody here back to the Missing Link. Today we're excited and honored to have back for a second time an experienced entrepreneur, investor, and advisor with a diverse background spanning nearly 3 decades in sectors like e-commerce, healthcare, blockchain, AI, and clean technology. He's also a political activist, and he's here to share his knowledge story with the Missing Link. Welcome back, brother. How are you doing today, Aaron Day?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing really good, really busy, just trying to get as much, information out to as many people as possible during this pivotal time in history. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey for anybody that may have not seen you the first time or maybe hearing you here for the first time?
Sure. So very quickly, my background is I started out as a serial entrepreneur. I dropped out of college when I was 19, started my first tech company, sold it, and then got involved in investing for a little while, decided I wanted to get back into entrepreneurship, started a healthcare company, which was destroyed by the federal government. It was destroyed by Obamacare. It was destroyed by Dodd-Frank, and it was destroyed by the Department of Justice. And I wasn't targeted. So when I say this, no one came after me directly. I was just collateral damage. And so that basically radicalized me in a significant way. And I've basically been a hardcore liberty and political activist since then. I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, which is a movement to get 20,000 people to move to New Hampshire and to make New Hampshire the beacon of liberty for the world. I was the chair of that organization for a while, ran a number of political organizations, super PACs, and others to help elect over 100 candidates at the state level. And my wife did the same, ran other organizations and helped to get close to 200 people elected. Eventually gave up on politics in 2018 and decided to look for alternatives outside of the system. And so in particular was interested in crypto and blockchain technology. I'd actually learned about and got my first Bitcoin in 2012. And then I exited the dollar completely in 2019. So I've been living off of crypto, gold, and silver since then. And then saw the combination of COVID tyranny, and then, unfortunately, saw that many of my friends in the crypto community in New Hampshire and elsewhere were being targeted by the federal government. And so I started to look into what was the source of COVID tyranny and why are my friends being targeted, and figured out that there's a common cause, which is that there is clearly which I outline in my book, The Final Countdown. There is a very coordinated plan moving towards one world government with the basis of the control system being central bank digital currencies. So basically, they're going after crypto because they've already developed a CBDC and they don't want competition. And this actually ties into COVID tyranny and the UN Agenda 2030 and all of that. And so I decided to write this book, and I actually even ran for president specifically to raise awareness around this issue. I'm not running anymore. And since then, I have been going around the country, 4-hour workshops, teaching people how to get off of the dollar and to start using alternatives as the way to protect themselves from CBDCs and complete digital tyranny. So that's the quick overview.
So now there's a lot of people that still, involve themselves into politics. They see how the left is so horrible, so they want to vote the right or vice versa. What's your thoughts being immersed into politics, super PACs about, possibly one day voting ourselves out of tyranny?
So I've actually been close to politics in the U.S. for 30 years. My stepmother started out in the Republican Party at a very low level and ended up being the co-chair of the RNC. So she was basically the number 2 person nationally for the Republican Party, and was Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. So I've seen, in addition to my own political activism, I've seen politics up close. I have no belief, excuse me, that anything can be done at the federal government level for a variety of reasons. It's captured by big financial interests, for one. Secondly, we now have this deep state that you really have no ability to unwind. And on top of that, voters are apathetic and unknowledgeable. I mean, in the United States, 2/3 of voters can't even identify the 3 branches of government. And so most of these elections are now determined by the political parties using get out the vote and big data and AI.
Besides the, potential for them to, change voting through the machines and it be totally corrupted, isn't democracy mob rule? And if, 51% of the people say, everybody's got to get injected, they got to get injected against their will in a democratic place, if that was voted into legislation?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly the case. I mean, the United States was supposed to be a constitutional republic where the role of the government was explicitly defined and limited, but it has become more of a mob rule democracy. But even beyond that, it's not even what people vote. This is what deep state actors push on people through regulations and through administrative rules that aren't even part of the Constitution and aren't even voted on. So we have a completely different level of tyranny now. It's not that the majority of people are voting for these things. It's that a very small number of unelected people are using administrative rules to force this on people. That's essentially what happened with COVID. And if you look in particular, I think there's the place with the biggest amount of tyranny is the whole public health sector. And what we're seeing with public health now is this movement. And when I say there's a movement towards a one world global government, you can see this with the World Health Organization and the pandemic treaty that they're working on. They're essentially looking at eroding national sovereignty by having all members of the World Health Organization basically have to comply with a common set of standards for how to deal with things like pandemics. However, if you actually dig deeper, they will clump anything into this public health sphere, including climate change and even whether or not you are allowed to have access to firearms. So in essence, you have public health basically as the conduit for the erosion of rights and the erosion of national sovereignty, even above and beyond what people may or may not vote for in these rigged manufactured polarity contests that we call elections.
In the, movie series Star Wars, you have the dark side, the Imperial fleet, the Imperial forces. Is this kind of a representation of what that one world government or, one, world system, the New World Order that they're looking to implement here on Earth?
Yeah, I think you could, and I've outlined this a lot, and there are a lot of kind of ways that you can look at. I mean, is this, light versus dark, good versus evil? There are a whole variety of different ways. I tend to take the most charitable case example of what's going on. So because even if you take the best case scenario, it's still bad, and I guess I'll explain why. We basically have this situation where, let's assume that there's a small number of elite people that have access to a lot of resources, and they truly believe that in 2 things. One, they believe that we have scarce resources and that humanity is facing an existential risk based on their perception of these limited resources. And that the only way to solve this problem is to have elites pick the best scientists and engineers to make decisions for people, and that we can perfect man through the application of technology. So this is kind of the best case scenario that we have to look at. The problem with all of that is, in a general sense, there's what you know you don't know, and there's what you don't know you don't know. And it's the what you don't know, which is almost infinite in comparison to the other 2 slices of the pie. And so even if their intentions are pure, what they're doing is they're trying to take what it is that they think they know and make that the entire range of what human experience is. And that is by nature limiting, and will actually force and drive an outcome based on scarcity, fear, and centralization.
Now, they're thinking that they're wanting the best for us, but they've had this rise of the expert where people no longer think for themselves. It's about trusting the expert. And I think that was part of their plan to implement, where people would just follow along with what the experts say, even if it's leading them off a cliff, like potentially injecting harmful things into their arm, like we just seen for the last 4 years. How much of these experts are actually experts, or are they just bought and paid for, to implement the system that they want?
It's a really insidious system. And I think that the way that this model works is the best way I've heard it described is it's organized incompetence. So you have people at the top that know what the agenda is that they're pushing, whether it's well intentioned or not well intentioned, and then we structure society around having these experts. And being an expert just means basically that you have complied with, excuse me, you've complied with training and indoctrination. So the higher you go up on the expert scale, all that really represents is that you've gone through more and more tiers of indoctrination. And so the higher you move up the level, the more kind of sunk cost you have in your training. And so most people don't even question whether or not what they've been taught is completely the opposite of what they've been told the intent is. So I think most people operating in this system, like for instance, I don't think most nurses, I think most nurses get into the profession wanting to help people and they have positive intentions. And it never would occur to them that the entire medical complex is basically structured in a way where the information that they're getting above them and so on and so forth is actually not even designed or intended to optimize human health. Like, it just wouldn't occur to most normal people that society would actually be organized that way. And so this is the way that we're able to create a situation where most people think they're doing the right thing, but because of siloing information and this hierarchical structure, they end up doing the opposite.
Do you think that's because people are mostly inherently good and they can't fathom the possibility that there are people out there that are doing these things nefariously to actually harm, control, or even genocide people, that they can't actually comprehend it possible, why they don't want to listen when, the people are rattling the cages trying to make them awake and aware of what's really happening?
I mean, whether people are inherently good or evil, I don't know the answer to that. I think maybe that's a choice. I gotta think. Part of me thinks that we're here to exercise our free will to decide which of those camps we want to be in. But I think that we're indoctrinated to believe that the system, excuse me, the way that it's structured has positive intent. That's what we are taught in schools, and that's what we're taught through the media. That's what we're taught through advertising. And so to actually be able to break out of that matrix requires a lot of awareness, which is hard to, I guess, come by when you're being indoctrinated through so many different channels.
Some people think that there's NPCs here, non-player characters, soulless beings. No matter what you say to them, they'll never wake up. Do you think that's the case, or do you think it's just a spell that needs to be broken? And once people can wake up from the spell, they actually have hearts, they have souls, and they would want to do the right thing if they weren't programmed or under this heavy black magician, dark magic spell.
Um, that's a tough question. I mean, it could actually be a hybrid, right? I mean, there could be a combination of these things. But I think when you look at um, you know, human development for the first 7 years of our lives, we're in kind of this alpha wave brain state where we really don't make conscious decisions. Things just kind of come in. So we're highly suggestible. This is why children often can't differentiate between imaginary friends and real friends, because they haven't really developed that sense of awareness and ability to fine tune. And so what that also means is for the first 7 years of your life, you're highly programmable. And so what goes in the first 7 years will largely determine what the outcome is, unless you become aware of the fact that that programming happens at a very fundamental and deep level those first 7 years. So I think most people, I don't know the answer if people are NPCs or not, but I can very clearly see the process by which people get programmed. That first 7 years is vitally important. And if you go from that first 7 years to then going through public school indoctrination, and then even college indoctrination, which is even worse. So now you've gone through, 20, 25 years of your life where you were imprinted with programming for 7 years, and then it's been built and leveraged off of that for another 15 or 20 years or so. It's pretty hard to work out of that and to exit that matrix, but it certainly is possible.
Do you think it's those first 7 years that causes some people to be more awake and aware to what's going on, and the others to not, and not question? Maybe they questioned the first 7 years, maybe something happened, because it seems like there's quite a distinct difference between the people that, are questioning things to the people that just go along to get along.
I don't know if the difference is necessarily in what happens those 7 years versus some event triggering later in life people to question their fundamental programming. And you see this a lot. I've worked a lot on kind of personal transformation, and I've studied that. And unfortunately, as much as I wish this weren't the case, most people, kind of hit rock bottom or go through some kind of, really bad situation before they make these kinds of revelations. And so I don't know if it's anything inherent about the first 7 years of programming, or more reaction to events later in life that cause an awakening, and then cause actually you to question your own self and to question what happened during those formative first 7 years. Because the one thing that I've seen that seems to be common for people that go through kind of transformation is when they go through that transformation, they end up really realizing, hey, wait a minute, everything that I thought about the world is basically a lie. And then that goes back to a period of time where you weren't even aware of awareness, right? And so that goes really, really deep. So that's my best guess on that, but certainly could be wrong.
Do you think right now society, where we're at, is the frog in the boiling pot theory, and eventually it's going to boil to the point where people are going to get burnt, realized what's going on? Like, where do you think we are, as a society as a whole?
I mean, when I look at what's going on, I guess I don't necessarily see that happening. I think people get really caught up in these manufactured polarity contests and really get caught up in picking a side. It almost seems like we've really been engineered or programmed that, we have to pick Coke versus Pepsi. We have to pick red versus blue, which we don't. We have we actually also have the ability not to choose, or to choose something completely different. But if you look at what's going on politically, at least in the United States, what I've seen is, people who spent 4 years complaining about Trump and Operation Warp Speed are now like, he's the hero relative to Biden. It's just like, I sit back and I look at this, and it's like, okay, let's look at what's going on in the United States. We have a situation where the two presidents that probably implemented the greatest tyranny in terms of the surveillance state and invasion of people's, biology, those two people are running against each other, and 95% of Congress is going to get reelected. So you have this whole situation where everybody is so entrenched in this election. And at the end of the day, the election results don't matter, because we're going to end up with essentially the same thing we've had for the last 8 years, regardless. Change isn't even on the menu. But people are certainly fractured about it. They're certainly argumentative about it. They're certainly, attaching their identity to having picked one of these sides. So I think for as long as people are detracted and distracted into thinking that they have to pick one of these lesser of two evils choices, we're not going to have that boiling frog situation, or that situation where people wake up. What seems to happen is people go from one manufactured contest to another. And while that's happening underneath, the surveillance state is expanding and the move towards one global government is expanding at an even more accelerated clip.
Now, there are people that have become awake and aware and are doing off-grid communities that are going into crypto, that are doing these other solutions. But do you think if this, New World Order takes place, that essentially anyone that doesn't follow suit will be safe?
So I think we have to stop. I get asked this a lot, and being somebody that's in New Hampshire, that's moved to a specific place and who actually lives on crypto, gold, and silver, you'd think, oh well, okay, I must be excited about what I'm doing. One of the revelations that I've had though throughout this process, and after seeing friends thrown in prison. I mean, since we last talked, I can't remember how long ago it was, but my friend Ian Freeman is now in federal prison for 8 years for selling Bitcoin. My other friend, Roger Ver, who I just interviewed, was arrested in Spain for a tax issue after he renounced his U.S. citizenship going back 10 years. And they threw him in the same prison John McAfee was in, and they're trying to extradite him to the United States and, charging him with up to 30 years in federal prison. So the conclusion that I've come to, and that those are just two examples out of many. There are many people that are being thrown in prison related to crypto and related to things that are all about promoting voluntary exchange. And so these are people that left the United States or people that have been part of peaceful movements. So we actually have to stop the New World Order because their design on this is to control, regulate, and manage every asset on Earth. The land, the air, the sea, everything is part of that. So there's not really a coexistence alongside with it because this technocratic view doesn't respect natural law. It doesn't respect individual rights. It doesn't respect property rights. They don't care about any of these things conceptually. They literally have this elitist top-down perspective. And so from my perspective, they need to be stopped. We're not going to be able to hide in, as much as I love New Hampshire and the picture of the mountains, I'm not going to be able to hide in a cabin in the woods, even if I've got a mesh network and some friends, because that isn't compatible with their worldview. Now, with that said, they can be stopped because their approach requires a high level of compliance. And so it's just as the United States. I was just at the Red Pill Expo and got the opportunity to meet and speak at this event and talk to G. Edward Griffin. And, he told this story about how the American Revolution started with 0.5 to 1% that then recruited 3%. And then that 3% recruited 15%. And so that 15% is what won the Revolutionary War. So to actually be effective against the New World Order, we don't need 50% of the population plus one. We actually just need a movement of a relatively small percentage that are willing to not comply and are willing to engage in civil disobedience and are willing to forge and pursue alternative paths. But we need enough people. So in other words, it's not enough if just a couple thousand people do it. We do need to get a few percent to do it, to move the needle. And I do think that we can. So as much as I may be sounding pessimistic, I do think that we actually can overcome this. It's just that I think people need to realize how severe this situation is. And I've even found in Liberty and crypto circles that people have not, it just hasn't been on their radar exactly how quickly they're moving towards things like CBDCs and social credit systems. This is going at an alarming pace, which is why, since I wrote my book and started talking about this and trying to get people on board, it's only gotten worse. This is actually official government policy in the United States. Biden passed an executive order 14067 authorizing the pursuit of a central bank digital currency and also authorizing a whole of government approach to cracking down on crypto. And they've been doing that through the Treasury Department, the FBI, the SEC, CFTC, 8 different departments of the federal government have been cracking down on crypto to the point where there are only 4 exchanges in the US where you can even buy crypto. And if you want to go through that process, you have to go through biometric identification. You have to basically give all of your information. The IRS is now requiring people to self-report cryptocurrency. And this is all intended to shut the on and off ramps because they've already built the CBDC. and many people are not aware of how late in the game we are. So if we're going to have a shot, we need to start exiting these systems, starting with fiat currency immediately.
What you're saying is I've been hearing those numbers that it only takes between 3 and 7% in order to really, not comply, to make, other people, this rippling effect to happen to a lot more people. And you're saying is to exit the system. How best can people exit the system if they're now, like you said, targeting even people, that are doing things in crypto?
Well, like I said, I've done it. I exited in 2019, and I use a combination of crypto, gold, and silver. There's a lot of things that people do that are just not wise with crypto. I mean, I think one of the big issues with crypto is, and I know this now from giving talks in 22 different states, most people don't even think about it as a currency that you can use to buy and sell things, as something that you can use for trade. Most people just look at it as a speculative asset. So rather than taking custody of crypto and using it, they're investing in it through BlackRock and through these centralized exchanges. And so this is just the wrong application of the technology. So it certainly is still possible to get paid in crypto. And one of the initiatives that I've launched since we last talked is I'm building a point of sale system that merchants can use to receive crypto, gold, and silver. That's completely outside of the system, because unfortunately right now, when most people use crypto, it's to convert crypto to fiat currency and then use the fiat currency to buy and sell things. And so a report just came out that only 1% of Americans have used crypto to buy or sell things in the last year, which is down from 2% the previous year. So we need to actually create tools that make it easy for merchants to accept alternate payments. And so I'm doing this as an open source free project, because it can't be a centralized company or it runs the risk of being shut down. So in short, we actually just need to out innovate. One of the things that's plagued crypto is because people have been so focused on just investing and then holding and then not using the crypto and then not developing new features around it, that has given the traditional financial system and central banks the opportunity to actually leapfrog in terms of functionality, how digital currencies function. So for instance, Bitcoin is still only 7 transactions per second, and it's slow to use, especially when demand picks up. Meanwhile, the CBDC that they've developed can do 1.8 million transactions per second. And even, since Bitcoin was launched, companies like Venmo, Zelle, Apple Pay, Google Pay, none of those things existed when Bitcoin was launched. They all now exist, and they're actually easier to use and cheaper to use than Bitcoin. So a lot of I think the effectiveness in blunting crypto has been somewhat about regulation, but it's also been about crypto being lackadaisical and not actually innovating. So at some level, if we're going to defeat what they're building, we actually have to build better things. And that's where we've kind of lost steam and momentum. But it is solvable, but you have to identify that there's a problem before you can solve it. And I'm finding that people are now starting to wake up to that. I just hope we have enough time.
Pinkarisa from our Rumble channel says, can we use crypto to buy groceries or shop at farmers markets yet? Is this, we're still a ways away from that? Or are we, like you said, you're launching something to be able to make this happen? Because, essentially that's the number one thing, is people being able to feed their families. And if they can't do it through crypto and have to use, their monetary system, it's not easy to exit.
I mean, one of the benefits of being in New Hampshire is that we have a huge community. So I can buy, groceries from a local farmer's market. And in fact, I can use these things, gold backs, which are bills. This is a bill that has 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. There are 150 merchants in New Hampshire that accept this. The way that we do this is by people just getting these currencies and then going to their local business and talking to the business owner and saying, will you accept this? That's actually the way we're going to do it. It's going to be a viral person-to-person situation where we go to local businesses and ask them to accept these currencies. And when what you'll find is people are open to it, people that understand what's going on. I think one of the things COVID did was it made small business owners very aware that the Great Reset is all about consolidating power in the hands of large multinational corporations. So clearly, this agenda benefited Amazon and it benefited large corporations while small businesses were shut down. So I actually think you have a much more receptive audience. This is why I've launched and I've announced that I'm doing these 4-hour workshops in 17 cities across the US. And it's not limited to just 17 cities, but in these workshops, I spend the first 2 hours explaining the threat of CBDCs. And then the last 2 hours, I actually train people on how to use crypto, gold, and silver. It's a multi-asset approach. And then as soon as that point of sale system is ready, I'm also going to be educating business owners on how to start accepting these alternative assets. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm not going to stop until I, literally draw my last breath. Because to me, this is the way forward. As long as people have an ability to trade and accept alternate currencies outside of the system, then we still have freedom and voluntary interaction. There's something else that so much has happened since we had the last interview. I actually don't even know where to start, but I don't know if you've heard about this because it's predominantly a US phenomenon, but I was researching a little bit before this interview, and I think it probably affects Canada as well. Have you heard of this concept called the Great Taking? So this guy, David Webb, did an analysis of looking at contracts, and he spent a lot of time on Wall Street and working on, really knows the ins and outs of how Wall Street works. And what he determined is, excuse me, in the United States, people don't actually own stocks, bonds, 401ks, and retirement plans. In fact, this whole concept of you will own nothing and be happy, we're already largely there. So, in the US, every time we use social media, we give away our rights. So we give away our data, we give away our information. We don't own the money in our bank accounts. I did an analysis of the 4 largest banks in the US. And when you look at the terms and conditions, they can cancel your account without notice and without cause. They can change the fees at will. They can and do share and sell your transaction information. In fact, banks are now working directly using AI to work with the IRS to analyze people's spending patterns to see if they are paying their, quote, fair share on taxes. And they can change the terms and conditions whenever they want. So you don't own the money in your bank account. You don't own the information through any of these services that you use. And it turns out you don't own stocks and bonds that are in your retirement account. And you can see this by the fact that most people have 401ks, which I think it goes by a different name in Canada. But essentially you have these retirement vehicles where you own a bunch of stock. But if you own a stock in a company, you get to vote those shares. That's typically how shares work and how incorporation works. And you never get to vote those shares. Those shares go to whoever the custodian is. So in your case, it might be the Royal Bank of Canada or whoever the largest custodians are. And in the United States, it's companies like Fidelity and State Street and Vanguard. Those are the people that vote all of the shares. So even though you think you own those shares, you don't actually vote those shares. You've literally given away your voting rights. But it turns out after the 2008 financial crisis, they made a whole bunch of changes in all 50 states to state law. And in essence, if there's a financial collapse, you would think, well, if I have my retirement account through Fidelity, if Fidelity goes under, well, those are my assets. I own those stocks and bonds, and so those will revert to me. Well, it turns out they changed the law, so that's not the case. In a case of bankruptcy, those assets would actually go to whoever the secured creditor is. And in most cases for these investment funds, it's the largest 4 banks and plus Goldman Sachs who are the secured creditors. So in a big financial collapse situation, all of our stocks, bonds, and assets will end up being taken over by the largest banks. So this relates to CBDCs because when they roll out CBDCs, they're rolling out CBDCs with this really boring thing called regulated liability network. But in essence, they're going to tokenize our assets and then put those on one ledger tracked to CBDC. So they're going to take all of our stocks and bonds and track that to our CBDCs and our identities. And so when this great taking concept comes along, they'll literally at a click of a button be able to sweep up all of our assets and confiscate our money. And so this is why this is a really big deal. So in addition to crypto, gold, and silver as an alternative to cash, I'm not allowed to say this because of the law in the United States. You're not allowed to give financial advice unless you're part of this registered cartel that has the power of the state behind it. But personally, I've dumped all of my retirement accounts because we don't own those assets. So if we don't own these stocks and we don't own these bonds, we need to move towards self-custody of everything in the perilous situation that we're in right now, because we know that the people that we're up against have every intention of taking all of these assets and controlling all of these assets. They literally don't believe in free will or property rights. They state it in their own propaganda, in their own materials. So there's a way to not get around, but there's an alternative to this great taking and this tokenization, which is to have tokens that you own that you keep in your own self-custody. So you basically tokenize your assets and you can trade your own assets, but you own the tokens and that you confidentially own those tokens so that the government can't come in and see who owns what. And I think that's an alternative strategy to the great taking and this whole 401k IRA scam, retirement scam that we have in the United States. And I suspect you have in Canada as well. I mean, I just played around and did a little bit of research, and I suspect there was a financial collapse in Canada. While they'll say, well, wait a minute, if the Royal Bank of Canada goes under, or if this bank goes under, you're protected because there's insurance. Well, when you dig in, you find that the insurance only covers a fraction of a percent of the underlying assets. So they'll blow through the insurance right away. And probably I suspect the same situation applies in Canada, where at the end, it's the largest banks and financial institutions that'll end up owning all of your stocks and bonds and assets.
To take it one step further, here in Canada, if there's ever a financial crisis, it's mandated that they can seize your assets in your bank, seize your money. They can take your money in a financial crisis. So this is something that's somehow put into legislation where you don't actually even own your own money, that they could take it at any time if it's deemed necessary.
Yeah, I know, and that's true in the U.S. That's true, and this happened in Cyprus several years back. They called it a bail-in, so the country was reaching a financial crisis, so they literally just took 50% of everybody's savings. So this is why I say to stop. This is how I got to where I am. Is all my experience in doing political activism and everything else. What I realized is, unless the way that we halt CBDCs, stop the New World Order, stop World War III and the Federal Reserve, is to just simply stop using government money, get rid of it, and move into these alternatives. That is the single choke point that if it's done, it actually collapses their system. And to the point we talked about earlier, you only need a couple of percent to do this, because at this point in time, the system is so over leveraged. Like in the United States, not only is our dollar not backed by gold anymore, but we used to have fractional reserves where banks were required to hold 10% of your customer deposits to be able to satisfy other withdrawals. And because of COVID policy, there are no longer fractional reserves. Banks are not required to have any reserves. And so in the US, I think I just saw that banks lost like $560 billion last quarter. There are all kinds of liquidity crises. So the whole system is blowing up. But the thing is, it's intentionally blowing up. It's a controlled demolition, because they know at the end of the process, they're going to roll out the great taking and CBDCs. They've already built the technology, which I can go through as much detail as you want on the actual tech. I've actually spoken to developers that work for the Federal Reserve. So this has already been built. And so, so we have to get out of their system before they have a controlled demolition is essentially what my message is to everyone.
What about for a majority of the people that are just living paycheck to paycheck, that don't have a bunch of savings, don't have a bunch of assets, don't have a bunch of means to, get away from the system, where they're just getting enough to get by? And I think that's a very high percentage of the population.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one for me. I mean, I actually lived in a big house and I consolidated everything down, and everything that I own now fits into 2 suitcases, because I just took the approach that, the more attached I am to the stuff that I currently own, that's one thing that they use as a point of leverage to kind of keep you enslaved. So I've focused on lowering my burn rate and lowering my dependency on the healthcare system and everything as much as possible. So lower lower your spending. And, as I say this coughing, I apologize. I'm working on a sinus infection here, but figure out how to not be dependent on, if you can, medication, because the healthcare system is another way that they absolutely wrangle you in. But then a lot of it is, at some point, there's going to be a decision about, am I paying these bills or not? Am I paying for my credit card? Am I going to continue to comply with these banks that print money out of thin air and then charge me extortionate interest rates? I mean, there comes some point where it's like, you know what? Great. You have a social credit system. You have a credit score. I'm out. If everybody just opts out of that system, then, again, they're so highly leveraged that we could actually stop the system tomorrow. If people just said, look, I've had enough of this. I'm not paying the bank. I'm not doing any of this stuff. Then their whole thing collapses. So this comes back to this whole point of, you're right. People are living paycheck to paycheck, but we're going to need 3% of people to say, yeah, we have an unknown future. We don't really have an unknown future. The way I look at this is very simple. The default is a one world government and complete digital tyranny. I assume that is the base case scenario. We're not going back to what the world was like pre-COVID. No one's even working on that. That's not, you know what I mean? There's no option for that. We're at a point where, with debt and everything else that's been racked up, plus knowing that they've been working for 5 decades towards these systems of complete control, we're not going back there. So once you accept the fact that digital slavery is the default, your willingness to kind of give up what you currently have in order to exit the system will increase substantially, even though the future is unknown. What we build out of this is an alternative. We don't know specifically what that looks like. There's a lot of uncertainty around it, but it's certainly going to be better than the guaranteed technocracy and tyranny that comes from what they've been working on and are rolling out pretty aggressively.
This technocracy and tyranny and digital slavery that you talk about is the emergence of bio-digital convergence, merging the human with technology, putting operating systems in them, uploading their consciousness into mainframes. Do you think that this is, a total computer-based digital reality that they're trying to create, away from God, away from creation, away from natural foods? Or do you think that this is full on genocide of the natural and it's going to be full amalgamated into the digital? Do you think in their plan, someone living off grid could even, maintain themselves without them getting their doors kicked in and, either killed or, having to be thrown into jail because they don't comply to this digital tyrannical system?
I go back to, we have to stop them. There is no, there's no coexistence with this model. Their model does, first of all, they look down on us. They already look down on, things like individual rights. They already look down on property rights. They literally don't care about these things. This is how, to them, to implement the COVID tyranny that they did, they don't question it one way or the other. They still don't think they did anything wrong. They actually believe that they're knowledgeable and that their knowledge and their elite status trumps our rights. That's why, when you see these people that were involved in COVID tyranny, none of them apologize, because they still believe that what they're doing is the right thing. And so, yes, I don't think we're going to be able to hide from this. I also do think, if you look at Yuval Harari and everything else, they have discussed that this is the end of free will. They have discussed the idea of manufacturing a new religion, creating an AI God. Harari talks about needing to have a common belief system in order to basically have societal stability, is, I think, the way that he kind of characterizes it. So he's literally all for this idea of manufacturing a new religion. So yes, they don't believe in God. They don't believe in natural law. That this is kind of in their writings, and certainly they believe in the blending of technology to perfect. And again, if you take the best case scenario, which is that they're well-intentioned, even if they're well-intentioned, they're wrong because they're basically applying their limited worldview on everybody else. When we live in a universe of infinite potential, and they're trying to create a manufactured scarcity of potential. And so even if their intentions are good, the outcome will be catastrophic. But it certainly does seem as though their mindset is really that we don't have free will, that we're just kind of machines. It's very much the opposite of consciousness. And so it's very frightening that is their disposition. There is no God. They are the gods in this new model through the application of technology.
So leaving intention aside, does this not look like evil? Like for them to want to forcefully do this upon people that are not, wanting to go along?
Well, I think it's evil because my belief system is, I believe in free will versus determinism. I believe in love versus fear. I believe in abundance versus scarcity, and I believe in decentralization versus centralization. So based on my beliefs, what they're doing is the antithesis of my beliefs. But of course, from their perspective, my beliefs they would probably characterize my beliefs as evil. So I guess it is a battle for what you think is good or evil. I think that what they're doing is evil, but I guess it might be argued that's just a perspective.
I'm 100% with you on that department. So you talk about this scarcity that, they're seeming to use against the people and the masses. Do you think that things here are really as scarce as they're saying, or do you think that this is what they're manufacturing, blocking out the sun to create less crops, manufacturing these water shortages when water is the most abundant resource on earth, manufacturing? Do you think they're manufacturing these scarcities in order to put fear and then to be able to control people through that fear?
I think they're absolutely manufacturing it, and they're manufacturing it in a very specific and provable way. They're basically using climate alarmism. The end state of this is that we move to CBDCs. So we take all of the assets and all of the CBDCs, and then each country has their own, it's called regulated liability network, and then they all connect to one another. And then at some point, the whole purpose of technocracy, if I had to summarize it in one short description, it's to convert the economy from being a price-based system to being an energy credit-based system. So the end output of this is that literally the monetary system is determined by carbon credits. And you can see this explicitly. There's something, I encourage you to Google it. I don't know if you can pull it up, but it's called a Doconomy MasterCard. They have actually created a UN Agenda 2030 branded MasterCard that people can sign up for, and it will track your carbon usage, and the card shuts off if you use too much carbon. This actually exists as a product. MasterCard is already working with 136 companies to track your carbon output and to tie that to your financial transactions. And literally the UN climate, the Sustainable Development Goal number 13, I believe it is, for climate action, it's on the credit card. So you might want to Google Doconomy carbon credit. You can do like a Google image search, and you can actually get a picture of what the actual card looks like. And there's another thing with a flow chart. Doconomy, you've got to put UN. You got to put carbon credits or okay. Something. Yeah, there you go.
That was it.
That's it. DO Black, the world's first credit card with a carbon limit. So I want people to understand and appreciate what you're looking at here. This exists. MasterCard has put these relationships together. This is being tracked. This is an actual MasterCard with a UN climate change logo. So right here on the back, well, you can't see my cursor, but that thing that looks like on the back of the card with the white eye. See, look at that. It says 13 climate action. See that? Right next to the signature. 13 climate action. That is Sustainable Development Goal number 13. one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. This is an actual MasterCard. So it is manufactured scarcity. And what's going on is behind the scenes, large corporations are going out and buying up land through conservation, through these front companies. They're buying up land, they're buying up forests. So basically, the trees aren't cut down. And they're doing this because it's going to give them energy credits in this new energy credit based system. So at the end of this, basically these companies, WEF companies, and these companies that are associated with MasterCard in working on building these types of tools are behind the scenes making investments so that they basically can own get a front run, basically ownership of these carbon credits, so that they're going to end up being the masters of the universe when we flip over to this new system, and the rest of us are going to get pushed behind, where our money is determined by our energy output. And then if you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, look at those as elements of a social credit system. And so this is how your behavior will be tracked, rewarded, and punished, and then tied into this carbon credit based system. So it's completely manufactured, and it's manufactured because it specifically benefits the elites. I mean, this is going to be the biggest redistribution of wealth in human history, and it's all based on manufactured scarcity.
It says it right all here. D.O. Black, the world's first credit card with a carbon limit.
So I was blown away. So I wrote my book and I talked about this as being possible. And this has been around for a while, but for whatever reason, it didn't come up in my research until a few months ago when I was going to give one of my workshops. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing actually has the UN branding on a MasterCard. And then I started digging into MasterCard, and then I looked at MasterCard's relationships with the WEF. And I actually got a list of the 136 companies that are part of working with MasterCard on this. So it has BMW as part of it. Airlines are part of it. Hotel chains are part of it. Very large corporations, most of them also WEF partner companies, have already built the infrastructure to track carbon. And now that can be tied instantly to financial transactions. So they built this infrastructure. So the problem that I face often being in the liberty movement and the crypto movement is there's this belief that governments are incompetent, and governments are incompetent. In the United States, people look at this and say, well, look at how much of a disaster the Obamacare rollout was. Certainly they're not going to be able to roll out CBDCs and this sophisticated tracking thing. And the thing is, it's not governments that are rolling this out. It's the largest multinational corporations. It's the most well-funded companies hiring the best talent in the world that's doing it. It's the government that is going to pass the laws, or more importantly, give up its sovereignty to groups like the UN and the WHO, which is part of the UN. They're going to give up sovereignty to those organizations, and those organizations are essentially being directed by the elites that are running these multinational corporations. So to me, this isn't even a theory anymore. This is actually literally in black and white. And I go through some of this in my book, but I actually need to update my book because it's so stark and it's so clear, and they're brazen about it. They don't even hide it anymore. And they've been able to indoctrinate people and children through schools. I mean, we talked about the 0 to 7 age thing and everything else, but I've seen some of these surveys about how children don't want to have kids don't want to grow up and have children because they have bought into the climate hysteria. You have people that are actually committing suicide and having anxiety and being medicated because of what they're being taught in schools about this climate alarmism. And when you back up and look at the history of this, so far as I can tell, the biggest group that's been pushing this is a group called the Club of Rome. And this is a group of like 400, elites that have been pushing this climate stuff since the 1970s. And so this is really, at least so far as I've been able to pin down, the group that behind the scenes has been pushing the narrative, writing books and doing the kind of the public propaganda campaigns for 50 years to get people locked in to and programmed to believe that we have this scarcity. I believe we have no scarcity. I believe that, even at a fundamental level, we're more energy than material. I think we've pushed everything to, we live in this materialistic world with all these limits. And I think that's probably a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And I think the energy is essentially infinitely limited, if unlimited, if we could tap into it. But we have suppressed technological innovation in harvesting energy and coming up with unique, low cost, or if not completely free sources of energy. And in the United States, we've done this through the Invention Secrecy Act, where over 5,000 patents have been suppressed by the government. The US government has this system where any department of the government can come in. So the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy can come in and say, yeah, we can't allow this patent because it's a threat to either national security or financial security of the nation. Well, so if I'm an oil company, if I'm ExxonMobil and I control the Department of Energy, which is how this works, all of these government departments are controlled by the people they're supposed to regulate. They'll come in and make the argument that, hey, this new free technology, that's going to put 200,000 oil jobs at risk. That is a threat to financial security. We have to suppress that patent. And when they suppress these patents, what it means is the patent never gets published. And the patent holder, I can't remember if it's 10 or 20 years, if the patent holder even mentions the patent or the invention, I think it's an automatic 10 or 20 years in federal prison. So over 5,000 patents have been suppressed using this. So I believe that we have abundance. I believe that we have unlimited potential. And more importantly, I believe that it's been understood that this is the case, and it's been explicitly suppressed through these government schemes like the Invention Secrecy Act.
100% great information there. And they've even killed a lot of people that have come up with these free technologies and free energies that wouldn't sell or wouldn't suppress. That's happened. And if we got back into balance with nature, if we got back into balance with people growing their own foods, we could have an abundance for everyone. But what you just said, Pinkarisa made an interesting comment too. We've got over 300 people watching here live. To everybody that's listening, with what Erin was just saying is how this has become a reality. She says, I bought something yesterday, and if I use Shopify, it has a negative carbon credits. And she's like, what the fuck does that mean? They're actually on Shopify talking about negative carbon credits on purchases that you're making. So this is actually being implemented for personal shopping as well.
It is. It's being implemented everywhere. And this is why one of the other reasons I focus on crypto and alternative assets, and then needing to build a point of sale system that's free and open source, because they can use as choke points. They can go after Shopify. They can go after PayPal. They can go after whoever these centralized systems are. If you're doing anything through the App Store, then Apple and Google have control over whether that technology is available. So if you want to sell something through the App Store, if you don't comply with the carbon tracking, then your app may be kicked out of the App Store. So and what I'm trying to make people aware of is the fact that this stuff has actually already been built. None of what I'm saying is theoretical. None of this, when I was talking about this a year ago, I thought it was more theoretical than it actually is. And then I'm like, wow, this is even worse than I thought. And it's spreading. And in the United States, I know it's happening at the state level. I've talked to people all over the country where they have been passing legislation at the state level, specifically around conservation and what you can and cannot do with land. And when you really dig into it, you find out that this whole thing is about carbon credits. So behind the scenes, people are kind of already gearing up and built. This is why ESG was actually a big push last year. And while it may seem like there's a temporary setback, they'll just brand it something else and they'll bring it back in an emergency. This is why when you look at this World Health Organization pandemic treaty is a significant issue, because when public health officials have already stated that they believe it's within their power to declare climate emergencies as being a public health issue. So this is actually the path of consolidation of power centrally through global organizations. And so we need to be aware of this now, but we need to be exiting these systems now. It's a constant struggle, because people are like, oh, well, yeah, we're going to vote our way out of this. And it's like this is so entrenched, and this has been going on for so long, that we just need to stop using their money and stop participating in their system. And enough of us need to do it at the same time, or we're all going to get forced with this, or, thrown in cages or whatever. And I guess to me, having friends now that are in federal prison, and that I interviewed another guy on my podcast after I interviewed Roger Ver, who, by the way, he wrote this book, Hijacking Bitcoin. So Roger Ver was known as Bitcoin Jesus. He got that name because in 2010, he found out about Bitcoin. He was the first merchant to accept Bitcoin. He was the first person ever to invest in Bitcoin companies. And he invested in a number of exchanges, a number of cryptos. He probably introduced more people. And as a direct participant, he realized it was hijacked between 2015 and 2017. So instead of Bitcoin being a peer-to-peer digital cash that people used to buy and sell things and for trade, it became digital gold, and now some asset that you just invest in and you hold and you never spend, and you buy through an entity like BlackRock. It's the exact opposite. And so he wrote this book outlining what happened from his first person perspective, but also using quotes from the people that he claims, and I believe makes the very persuasive fact-based case, hijacked Bitcoin. 3 weeks after this book was published, he was thrown in prison in Spain. I interviewed a guy 2 weeks after I interviewed Roger, a guy named Steven Nerioff, and Steven was a guy very early involved with the Ethereum cryptocurrency. He's a lawyer and an inventor. He actually created the security token and the ICO and some of these other things. He uncovered corruption between some of the early people at Ethereum and the SEC. And so to shut him up, the Department of Justice manufactured an extortion case against him. They sent 12 FBI agents to his house in the middle of the night, took him out of his house, threw him in a van, cuffed him, and then they showed him a list of people and said, unless you give us information that leads to these people, being basically arrested and prosecuted, you'll never see your kids again. And on that list were a lot of my other friends and people like Roger Ver. And so he fought this. The DOJ dropped the case, and he's now suing the federal government for $9.6 billion. But I bring this up to say, I know people that are on a list that the DOJ literally manufactured in 2019 a fake case against a guy to get him to give up information, assumed that these friends of mine in the Liberty crypto space were guilty without any evidence. And this has been going on for 5 years. So I don't think people appreciate how coordinated the developments are in terms of not only CBDCs and crypto, but also with energy credits. And the best way I can describe it is, if you want to know what the world is going to look like moving forward, it's one digital currency backed by energy credits with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN as elements of a social credit system. That is absolutely what they are building. And they are very far along in this, to the point where they don't even try to hide it. So like, I'm not even giving you some, oh, hey, here's my crystal ball. They're the primary source on this. Go to the UN's own website, review their own documents, review their own speeches. This is all them as primary source material. So I think they don't believe that we can stop this. And I think that they just believe that they're at the point right now where they're going to be able to do it. And there's nothing that we can do to stop it. And they've used this manufactured scarcity specifically around climate and around carbon. And by the way, that's been very effective for millennials and Gen Z. Like this is one of those, this is a weird situation that I've experienced. You would think, because I'm talking about alternative currencies and everything else, this would be something that would resonate with younger people. And it doesn't. It resonates more in the United States with boomers, or with people that actually remember what property rights were like and remember what individual rights were like. In the US, Gen Z and millennials don't even have any expectation or understanding of what privacy is. I saw a poll that said that 35% of Gen Z would be okay with the federal government putting surveillance cameras in people's homes to monitor for domestic violence. So this is the challenge, and it relates to this whole how deep the indoctrination has gone on for the last 40 years, to where younger people don't have an expectation or interest in privacy and believe in the climate alarmism, because this makes it more difficult. Usually, this kind of when you think about movements and civil disobedience and these types of movements, they usually happen with young people. And this is one of those weird times where that's kind of flipped on its head a bit.
So I've done a little bit of research on this carbon climate change scam that, they have going on. Not only are they, changing the climate with the stuff that they're spraying and the HARP and all these things to make things visible, but when it comes to this carbon, it's a complete and total scam, because not only one does life need carbon to live, the trees breathe and ingest the carbon. Human beings are only responsible for 11% of the total carbon emissions on Earth. One volcano could put 1,000 times more carbon into the atmosphere than humans would do in 1,000 years. One volcano. So not only that, Canada is responsible for 1.5% of that 11% globally. Canada's the second highest carbon taxed country in the world behind France. But not only are we the second highest taxed, we have the most carbon consuming trees because of the abundance of forests. So we're actually carbon negative, not carbon positive, but we're the second highest tax. So what they're saying is, because of the forest fires that are going on Earth, is that we're putting so much more carbon into the atmosphere because of all of our forest fires, yet they're sending off aluminum oxide through these planes to make the forest burn hotter and faster to help this whole climate carbon scam going. And even if humans went down to 0% carbon emissions, it would make no difference on the climate and what's happening. So this thing is a total scam that they're perpetrating on humanity as a control mechanism structure, like you said, to be able to control people through these carbon bits.
Yeah. And so when you dig into this, and again, you see Greta Thunberg and you see people put out this propaganda about this, and it's all about saving the planet. Here's who owns the most carbon credits: Tesla, Chevron, major technology companies like Microsoft, JP Morgan Chase, Stripe, the credit card processor. These are the people that are already buying up carbon credits. So if you want to ask yourself, why are these people doing this? Are they doing this to protect the planet? The best way that I can describe it is look at it as the new global currency is going to be based on energy credits. These people are getting a jump and a head start on basically owning the money supply of the future. This is not being done out of any sense of saving the planet or for any humanitarian aims. This is being done for financial reasons, and they are using propaganda and then the force of the state to back all of this up. And so, but it's tough because, right, we can talk about this now. Go talk to a 13-year-old kid that's been listening to climate propaganda in school, and then all their friends are like, oh yeah, looking at all these, here's what's happening, here's all the devastation that's happening to ecosystems and all of the propaganda. I mean, remember Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, how none of that has come true, but yet, last time I checked, it's probably more than this. He's made $300 million since he put out that hysteria, right? And people bought into it. People were like, oh wow, this guy's smart. Isn't he smart? And I'm listening to him. And Larry David's ex-wife from Curb Your Enthusiasm was highly involved in that, and everybody was out to save the world, and it was all a hoax. But the people involved in it have made hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. It's a complete scam.
And part of that to solidify him was, oh, look how he got railroaded in the election. He must be a good guy. And hence why they so much more believed him, because of that BS that happened with the election. Yep.
Yeah. So so from my perspective, I truly believe in abundance. I believe that we already probably have the technology behind free energy. And so here's to go to this whole manufactured polarity contest, then what it becomes is you've got to pick a side. Are you for solar panels or are you for oil? Right? That's the thing that you're supposed to believe in. I'm for, let's release the 5,000 patents that were suppressed under the Invention Secrecy Act. I'm for, let's find out what alternative technologies there are. I'm not going to believe the green technology. I mean, you said in my bio, I actually worked in clean tech for a while, and I left because I was unwilling to participate in trying to get these government credits and go and work through that process. But I work for a company that was doing some, innovative things with solar panels and predominantly solar panels. And the technology is not there. And what ends up happening is the government ends up subsidizing this inferior technology. So there's no market innovation or competition. It's, do you own the politicians that will give you subsidies to create these inferior solar products, or do you own the politicians that are providing subsidies to drill for oil? And what's possible from an energy perspective is infinite in comparison to those two choices. But we are to be taught that we're only supposed to pick that we are on side oil or we're on side solar or wind. And it is a false choice. And it is yet another manufactured polarity contest where we're taught that we have to pick red versus blue, or between these two different energy options, which are themselves ridiculous in terms of their efficiency. There's an infinite number of better ways to pursue things.
Well, isn't that the same as the political system? You're supposed to pick red or blue, left or right. You're supposed to pick solar or oil when we have magnetic energy. We have geothermal energy. We have biofuels. We have those mercury balls. They used to have mercury in balls above buildings that spun around and collected energy. So there is, like you say, so many ways that people could get free energy. And do you think if we free the energy, we free the people?
Well, I certainly think it would go a long way. I mean, and by the way, if that happens, if all of a sudden, think about the change in, you have to rethink everything, because we've talked a lot about how we've been indoctrinated, and and I've been a big fan of liberty, and a lot of that is is promoting capitalism and everything else. But if all of a sudden you actually don't have any scarcity with energy, you have to rethink a lot of core assumptions about how the world works and how the world operates. But yeah, it would be an absolute game changer. So much of our life is tied down to manufactured energy scarcity that we don't even conceive of all of the ways in which our decisions and choices on a day-to-day basis. And in fact, I mean, it gets worse, because then once you start looking at, in the US, the history of public education, and even the history of medicine, the whole reason that we have the medical system that we do, where it's, you need a pill or a procedure for every condition. I mean, a lot of that was based on the fact that petroleum was put into vitamins, supplements, and medications. A lot of this was driven by Rockefeller, this for financial interests. So we basically got rid of homeopathy so that Rockefeller could sell oil through the medical system. I mean, that's actually not an exaggeration. So I can't even begin to express, because I don't even fully understand myself, how deeply our human experience has been limited by manufactured scarcity around these things, and around oil, and around not allowing new technologies that could go above and beyond.
And our whole existence has been altered by poisoning everything with the oil. They're poisoning the bodies, they're poisoning the air, they're poisoning the agriculture. Everything is oil based. Imagine how much more abundance, beautiful and greener this place could be if we weren't polluting everything with this dirty oil energy.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. And somebody sent an image on Twitter, and I spent some time with it yesterday. It's that 12 companies own 550 different brands, and basically control most of the consumer products that we consume. And I was I was using AI to see, all right, well, how many of these products, and I was going through company by company, how many of these products have seed oils, have plastics, have fluoride, have sugar, or have GMOs. And I couldn't find a single product that didn't have one or more of those from these 12 companies that own these 550 brands. So yeah, our food has been poisoned. Our medicine is not even designed to cure things, and our medical system and the regulation around it has been designed to prevent even the pursuit of actual cures, and to reject 5,000 years of medical treatments that have been effective in other cultures and other places and other times. So yeah, no, we are truly living in the Matrix. We've been living in the matrix our entire lives. It's just a question of like how profoundly are we aware of how deep we are into it at this point.
Some people believe that, using your name is actually complying to the system. That's, they're saying you're saying the mark of the beast, don't use your name. That's your legal birth certificate. It's traded on the stock market. Whenever you use your identification, that's how they know you, control you. And if you give that up, you change, the way they can't even identify you. Don't be a part of that system is a way to get out of the system.
Well, this goes along with what I'm saying about use alternative currencies and, tokenize and trade your own assets privately and confidentially outside of the existing system, because, your stocks and bonds, again, yeah, those are tied to your identity, but you don't even own them. You just have a representation of ownership. You don't even have what you think you have as ownership. It's so many layers abstracted, and all of these things are tied to your identity. And there's a whole other realm of discussion around, whether you're obligated to pay taxes or not, based on a whole variety of other things. And I'm not going to get into any of that other than to say, exit the systems, exit the dollar, exit public health, exit public school, stop buying from big food, exit the stock market. And if you do those things, then, you essentially, you become ungovernable. And to the extent that enough people do this, then that's how we stave off one world global tyranny.
Have you heard of Gary Waterman, the police officer in the UK, who's uncovered that all of the companies that are incorporated are, and especially the ones on the stock market, are all incorporated with an alternate company that they've changed a little bit of their name. So really every single incorporated company is a manufactured company of the real, in order for them to never be held liable for the stuff that they do. So a company that's working under a certain incorporation name is not actually the registered incorporated name. And he was a police officer, retired, that found all this stuff out. He's been trying to rattle the cages, that's saying that even every single corporation is not really functioning legally.
I've heard of things about that, but I've never been able to validate any of those. And whenever I've tried to really track that down, I haven't found concrete proof of things like that. But I'm not saying that it's not possible, but I think the existing system that you can see transparently is bad enough as it is. In terms of how these things are structured. And, the real issue is, and the sad part about this is, we give away our rights ourselves, right? So when we log on to, Twitter, or where we use Microsoft or whatever, they have these click wrap agreements. And so we're actually signing off, it always says read the terms and conditions, and everybody, what do? They scroll down. Nobody ever reads it. And then you click accept. Well, you basically just signed and executed a legally binding contract, 30 or 40 page document, right? How many people have read the terms and conditions of their bank account? How many people have read the terms and conditions? We have been trained to not read these things. Nobody reads these things. And by the way, it doesn't even matter if you read these things, because it's not like you can redline them and send it back. It's like, oh, I don't want, Bank of America, I don't agree with your policy on this. Here's a red line, send it to their legal counsel and they're going to change it. It's a take it or leave it proposition. So we have largely given up, through our own volition, our rights to our information and our rights to our ownership of assets. And so we need to reclaim that. I think we need to reclaim that in a big way. And but again, this is one of those kind of like trick things. You go to good or evil. We've done this largely through exercising our own free will. We signed up for this stuff, so now we've got to, we've got to take that power back.
Now, here is about good timing, Kiwi. Corpse is a dead entity, corporation, as well as crypto a lot of people that are awake and aware, people in the freedom movements, they don't want to do crypto. They refuse to do crypto. They say crypto is just getting people into this digital currency space. And that was the whole lead up to it. And people have used it to become free, like you said, to exit the system. But that just trained people on the next portion of the tyranny, and that's what's made it all possible. And even crypto, the crypt, staying away from that. So there are people that are awake and aware, want to exit the system, but will not want to go to crypto. And how do you think that that fares for those people that just will refuse to do that?
Well, it's a choice. This is why what I do personally, and when I do these workshops, I teach people how to use crypto. I teach people how to use physical gold, and I teach people how to use silver. And if you don't like crypto, then don't use crypto. I happen to take the view that technology isn't inherently good or bad. It's what you make of it. I mean, electricity can be used to operate an electric chair, or it can be used to operate your air conditioning unit. So I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. There are over 20,000 cryptos. And what I like to say, it's the 99% that make the other 1% look bad. Most cryptos are fraudulent. And I've spent 12 years in this space, and so have gotten to understand the technology very well. Is it conceivable that Bitcoin was designed by the NSA or intelligence agencies to be a CBDC, or was it to condition people? I can't answer that. I personally don't use Bitcoin. Bitcoin has been hijacked. I think Bitcoin probably wasn't. I think Bitcoin probably had good intentions, but it was hijacked. And now Bitcoin actually, in its current form, is not something that promotes freedom. With that said, there are other cryptocurrencies that, like Monero and Zano and Zcash and others, that are encrypted and that are private solutions. So the idea of, again, using electricity isn't bad. It can be bad or good. The fact that you're using a digital currency isn't bad or good. The question is, what is the form of that digital currency? Central bank digital currencies are centrally controlled. You need permission to use them, and they can be tracked, monitored, and censored by third parties. A privacy coin, something like Monero or Zano, is not issued by a central party. It's completely decentralized, and the information isn't publicly available on a blockchain, and you actually own the assets that you use. So there's a freedom and tyranny dimension to everything, but it certainly is confusing, and that is part of the issue with all of this. Is there are a lot of people that just assume, well, all cryptocurrencies are bad, and I think that's not true. I think that only 99% of them are bad. You just have to find the 1%. But I have a balance. I mean, at this point, I used to be 100% crypto, and now I'm 50% gold and silver, 50% crypto. So I believe that everybody should have choice in what currency they use. And if you don't want to use crypto, don't use crypto. Use gold and silver. Use something else. But you don't want something centrally controlled of any kind. Even governments will screw up precious metals. Even gold and silver in the hands of government will be debased. We saw that with Rome, where by the end of the Roman Empire, I think silver, there was only 0.05% silver in a silver round. And so I think what we've seen throughout history is government screws up money. So if we want to liberate people, we need to separate money in state and allow people to engage in voluntary trade separate from the corrupting influence of government in money.
A lot of people that are controlling these systems, have stockpiled gold and silver. Now, if a lot of people that especially were awake and aware exiting the system went into gold and silver, and they decided to flood the market with gold and silver, it was no longer scarce, would that devalue it to make it almost worthless if the market was flooded with this stuff?
I think it's the opposite. I think right now the prices of silver and gold have been dramatically suppressed. I think I saw somewhere that there's like 400 ounces of paper silver for every one physical ounce, and it's like 250 gold paper certificates of gold versus to every one physical amount. So I don't see that happening. And in fact, the question is who is hoarding it? And and there are interesting things about, okay, hoard it in what sense? Because you may have central banks that have gold bars, but what are they going to do? Flood the system with gold bars? How are you going to use gold bars? This is why I like this gold back invention, because you still have the issue of how do you use these things in daily trade. And I know the people that created these gold backs, and I don't think anybody is out there hoarding tons and tons of gold backs. So I don't see that as a significant issue. I mean, is it possible? Sure, it's possible, but people have been tracking. Well, I mean, I guess you could hide how much gold and silver is being manufactured, but I mean, to the extent that there are publicly traded companies, mining companies that are involved in this, I think we have a pretty good sense of how much of these precious metals are actually out there. And it's interesting, in the case of silver, there's more silver used every year in commercial applications like technology and all of the other places that silver's used than is mined. So there's actually a dwindling supply of silver, and it's not quite the case with gold, but still there's a percentage of the mined gold that's actually used in industrial and other applications. And so I don't think that there's this big, like, unlimited supply out there. However, and this is one of the things that's interesting about crypto is it's limited supply. Although, of course, if there are an unlimited number of cryptos, is it really limited? But we could in the future, for instance, mine asteroids, and we might find a virtually unlimited supply of gold and silver on asteroids. I mean, there are actually companies out there that have been funded to specifically pursue mining asteroids. So there certainly can be supply shocks with precious metals, and there is a history of that happening. I mean, this is what happened in the United States with the gold rush in the 1840s. I mean, all of a sudden, there are these big new finds, and that big new find, puts a huge amount of new supply, and that affects the price. But I don't think that there's anything like that going on, because I think right now you have central banks. And in particular, China, I believe, has been the one. China and India have been gobbling up, as I understand it, the most gold recently. I think central banks are more competing against one another to get their hands on as much of this as possible, as opposed to wanting to flood it, because I think it's now being seen as a national security issue for nations to get as much of their hands on physical gold as possible. And by the way, this is why I say in everything that I do, it's self-custody everything. Own your own data, own your own gold, own your own crypto. If you're going to have crypto, don't leave it on an exchange. If you're going to have gold, don't go buy it through an online service where they say, oh, well, we're holding it in a vault for you. In the United States, gold has been confiscated before. FDR did this in the 1930s. And if you had your gold in a vault or a safety deposit box, they literally just took it. But if you had your gold and silver at home, even though it was illegal for you to keep your possession of it, they were not going door to door. So 25% of the gold remained in the hands of the people. So any of these systems where there's a third party involved, we can't trust at this point in time, because it is a point of failure where it's very easy for the government to come in and basically seize all of these assets. For instance, with Bitcoin, I believe the reason the SEC approved these Bitcoin ETFs was to make Bitcoin easy to confiscate. Because if you own Bitcoin through an ETF, first of all, you own a percentage of a Bitcoin ETF that BlackRock owns. BlackRock doesn't even hold the crypto. They have it through Coinbase. So if the government came in and said, well, we're going to ban crypto, they would just go to BlackRock. BlackRock would comply, and then they would confiscate the Bitcoin directly through Coinbase. It would be easier to confiscate Bitcoin through these third parties than it would be even to confiscate gold. And people don't like talking about that.
So speaking of confiscation, government confiscation of crypto, did you hear about Canada, the trucker convoy, the Emergencies Act, people that donated to the trucker convoy had their banks seized, had crypto taken, and some people feel that that was to open the door to see how that whole system worked, on how they can freeze assets, how they can take cryptos. It was kind of like a pilot project test run for this entire thing, to them to be able to seize people's cryptos and assets, just like they did in Canada with the trucker convoy.
Well, it's not limited to just Canada. And as I said earlier, in the United States, you don't own the money in the bank anyway. They have shut down Dr. Joseph Mercola and his executives of his company and his family. JP Morgan Chase froze his accounts. Kanye West, Nick Fuentes, gun groups, religious groups, people that sell cannabis in states where it's legal. All of these through what's called Operation, well, those ones that I mentioned at the beginning weren't part of this, but there's already something called Operation Choke Point, where it's demonstrated that banks can already shut off access to your money. This is why what I have been saying for a year and a half now is exit banks. You literally already don't own the money in your bank. I shared a tweet yesterday, and we've been seeing this all over the world. The tweet yesterday was somebody in England who went to the bank and they wouldn't let him withdraw his cash. We saw this in Australia, where this woman went to take money out and they actually said they don't have cash. Banks actually literally don't have physical cash. And because there's no longer fractional reserves, if you got 10 of your buddies and you went back down to the bank and tried to withdraw all your money today, they wouldn't have the money. They literally don't have the physical cash. In the US, when this happens, if you go to say withdraw $5,000, $10,000, you may need to set an appointment 3 days in advance. So what I'm saying very clearly is CBDCs are a threat, because CBDCs are a much more programmable form of money that's tied to digital IDs and social credit scores. But most of the things that people worry about when they think about CBDCs, we already have with the banking system today. The banking system today is already a surveillance system, and you already don't have control over that, which is why I exited the banks in 2019. And then I use a variety of these different assets. And now I'm saying, if you're going to use crypto, you need to use a privacy coin, because what we're finding is with Bitcoin, a lot of people early on thought Bitcoin was anonymous. And if you actually read the white paper, it never said it was anonymous. But in reality, if you use Bitcoin, all of your transactions are being stored on a public ledger, and everybody gets a copy of that ledger. It's a distributed ledger. And so if you go if you just use Bitcoin and you never use an exchange, then it may be difficult to identify you. But the minute that you use an exchange, they can do what's called chain analysis. And through chain analysis and using AI, they can track all of your financial transactions. So Bitcoin is a surveillance coin that has been hijacked by the same people in the United States that have developed all three US CBDCs. So while I promote crypto, my message on this is I don't recommend Bitcoin or Ethereum or the ones that people that are out there as being popular. You need something that's actually private, and you need to use it directly for transactions. This isn't about gambling on an exchange, because the minute you're on an exchange, you are KYC'd is what they call it in the US. You know your customer and anti-money laundering laws. They get biometric, they get, scans of your eyes, they get, pictures of your ID. All of that is tracked. And now all of your transactions are on a ledger tied to a centralized system. That is not why crypto was developed. Crypto was developed to not have third parties. Crypto was developed to be used instead of banks. And if you use something that was intended to be used for peer-to-peer commerce, but the minute you start using these in centralized systems, you've lost the plot and you've actually opened yourself up to mass surveillance.
You mentioned Monero a few times, and we were introduced here on The Missing Link by Jeff Berwick of the Dollar Vigilante. Jabanu from a Rumble channel says, what do you think of Jeff Berwick, Dollar Vigilante, and how he's been teaching people to get off of these Bitcoins into Monero, into these privacy coins?
I agree with him on that. I may be actually going down to Mexico to speak at his event next year. I've known Jeff for probably almost 10 years now. And, he was early into Bitcoin. There are a lot of people like Roger Ver who wrote this book. I actually talked to Jeff when Roger was thrown in prison. He reached out to me to find out what was going on. And Jeff has followed this because a lot of the people that got into Bitcoin early, they did not get into it thinking that it was a speculative asset. They got into it because they thought it was a form of payment that they could use outside of the system. So people weren't sitting there saying, like, I spent my early 2012 Bitcoin. I used it as cash, as its intended purpose. And so it wasn't about how long I can hold it and then cash out my crypto for fiat currency. That's actually not the point of cryptocurrency. And Jeff is 100% accurate that the way forward is through these privacy coins. And one of the things that if I do go to his event that I would be speaking about is actually Zano, because Zano was one of the developers of Zano actually was a co-creator of the technology behind Monero. And what Zano allows you to do is to tokenize assets privately. So whereas Monero is private money, so I can buy and sell things using this private form of cash, with Zano, I can tokenize my assets. I can tokenize gold, silver, my house, my car, and I can trade it confidentially. And so I believe that in the realm, this is the opposite of what we're going to get. And I know for the people that have said, well, they're just trying to train us on these systems. If we do nothing, the base case scenario is everybody will be forced to have CBDCs and all of our assets will be tokenized and tracked on a central platform that multiple third parties can monitor, censor, and program. That is the default case. So now we have to accept that that's actually the default case. And so now the question is, what are we going to do about it? And I think one way to counteract that is to actually use the opposite form of what they're building, which is a decentralized, encrypted private form of those things, tokens and digital cash.
Now, say we had 100 million people that listened to this broadcast and decided, you know what, I'm going to liquidate all of my fiat currencies, all of my assets. I'm going to put it into these, decentralized places and, basically bet on getting off of the system. And then they decided to, shut down all the taps, criminalize anyone for using this, make it so it was impossible. And now the people that did liquidate their assets, now became criminals if they tried to use any of these decentralized systems.
You can't comply your way out of tyranny. Period. There's a decision that has to be made. Are we going to take ownership of our assets and engage in voluntary trade or not? If we accept that we don't own our assets because some elites manipulate a system and decide that by law we're not allowed to engage in voluntary trade and we're not allowed to exit free will, are we going to tolerate that? I say no. And enough of us, again, it's only a couple of % of us need to do this. Not all of us need to do this, but again, America was founded on this. I mean, we had a 3-cent tax on tea that, kickstarted a revolution in this country. The idea that we would now sit here and say, well, I don't want to take ownership of my own assets because they might make it illegal. If that's our mental disposition, we've already lost. We're already enslaved. So I'm out on that. I'm not suggesting anybody break the law. Everything that I'm talking about doing right now is still currently legal. But what I will say is I'm not going to comply with, just as I didn't comply with the shots or any of those mandates. I'm not going to comply with this either. There's a certain point where it's like, no. And again, in this spiritual battle, and I've studied this a lot, how much of this has happened because we've exercised our free will, and through fear, we have actually caved, and we have made the free will choice to cave into fear. But what happens when we don't? What happens when we resist? Yes, people might lose their job, but I mean, we haven't seen people getting executed for denying the jab. And so it takes so few people to have courage. I mean, you mentioned NPCs before. Yeah, maybe we have a lot of NPCs. So maybe it's 0.5% or 1% that drive what the NPCs do, because the NPCs are just going to follow whatever's going on. So, being the 1.5 to 1%, that's That's what we need. And I'm saying this as somebody who has friends sitting in prisons in different countries right now, who are some of the most peaceful freedom advocates you will ever meet. Ian Freeman, he spent 20 years running Free Talk Live, a radio show, moved to the Free State Project. He has been completely a nonviolent person. He has only promoted freedom. He's only promoted voluntary trade. He's in prison for 8 years for selling Bitcoin. And Roger Ver has helped spread freedom across the globe and really kickstarted this crypto movement. And 3 weeks after he writes a book exposing that Bitcoin was hijacked by the same people that are implementing CBDCs, he finds himself in prison in Spain. But, I support those guys. We need to support these guys because we're all going to be them if we don't do something.
What does, going to jail for selling Bitcoin stand up in a court of law? Like, what was the actual crime that was, that he was convicted of?
Well, they said that he sold Bitcoin without a license, but then they actually charged him with a whole variety of other things. They actually charged him with the crime of one of his customers. So unfortunately, so Ian actually followed the rules. He followed the know your customer rules. He made sure he knew who was using his service. And he would even make sure, are you sure? Are you doing this voluntarily? Are you sure you're not doing this under duress? He actually went through all of those processes. And one of his clients was involved in a romance scam, basically going after, old ladies who whose spouse had passed away and whatever, they're in some money. Ian didn't even know who this guy was. But what this guy would do is he would have the women call Ian to basically convert their cash to crypto. So Ian didn't even know who the guy was that was doing these scams. He didn't know that they were scams. He did know your customer information and followed all the safeguards. And he got held personally liable for the actions of this other person that the FBI never caught. So he was forced to pay $3.5 million in restitution for the actions of one of his customers. Now, this recent change, this overturn in the Supreme Court of the Chevron case, might actually work to Ian's and Roger's benefit. Like that, I'm hoping that maybe Ian's case gets thrown out because it is so clear that the DOJ manufactured a case and completely manipulated the rules in a way that they've never been applied. I mean, if you look at and you think about what they did, then Jamie Dimon from Chase Bank should be in prison for life for the actions of Jeffrey Epstein, right? I mean, this is actually literally how absurd this is, except it's even worse because in this case, my understanding is that JP Morgan Chase knew what Epstein was. Ian literally didn't even know what was going on, and now he's sitting in this prison, and they've taken his money and they've tried to destroy his character. And again, this is a guy who is a liberty activist, who probably did more to recruit people to New Hampshire. He actually introduced Roger Ver to Bitcoin. So this is a guy that has done nothing but promote freedom and liberty. And so they're specifically targeting these people. And as I said, there is for a specific reason. If you look at Ian and Roger, they're probably, if you think about it from the standpoint of a pandemic, these two were probably the most responsible for spreading Bitcoin in 2010. People wouldn't even know about Bitcoin or how it would have taken shape or form. No one knows. But these guys were the original people that introduced people to this. And so they had to silence them. And I believe they absolutely manipulated the rules. And hopefully the Chevron case will expose that and they'll both be freed.
Now, you answered this question before, maybe before Michelle came, but there's a little bit of elaboration to the question. So what about seniors that only have enough money to survive? I guess they're kind of screwed because they have no extra money to invest, or even know the technology to be able to, try to exit the system. People that are maybe not so literate when it comes to that, as well as maybe not having the money. How do they fare into trying to help us all exit the system?
This is why I've been doing these workshops all over the country. So if you go to daylightfreedom.org, and I've got somebody who's approached me to do this in Canada as well. I wrote this book and I wrote the book, The Final Countdown. The whole purpose of this was, this was my intention when I wrote it, was I wanted a boomer that wasn't technologically sophisticated to be able to read the book. And in the first half of the book, it explains what CBDCs are, why they're a threat, why fiat currencies collapse. And the last half gives practical advice. Here are the actual steps, step by step. Here's how you download a wallet. Here's how you look at cryptocurrency. Here's a way to rank these things. Here's how you buy gold. Here's how you buy silver. And what I found is people read the book and they're like, oh, wow, this is scary, but they weren't actually taking that first step. So I'm doing these workshops now so that I can actually give people crypto, gold and silver, and show them how to use it directly. So to try to educate them. And what I'm doing now is I'm trying to build this point of sale system. And when I do that, I'm going to create an online version of the class so that anybody can see it anywhere. Because ultimately that's what we need to do. But what I've found is there's no substitute for human interaction. There's no substitute for sitting in a room with 100 people, 200 people, shaking their hand and hearing their question and answering their question, interacting with them in person. So I'm going to continue to do that regardless of whether there's an online version of it. But that's the approach that I've taken. And again, if you're hesitant on the crypto side of it, I mean, I'm holding these things up now. These gold backs, you don't need to understand technology. I wish this came through a little bit better, but look up gold backs. So this is a bill. This is 1/1000th of an ounce of gold. There is no technology required here. If you understand cash, you understand gold backs. So there's no age restriction on this. Anybody can understand how this works. If you can use cash, you can use gold backs. So I understand people may not want to use crypto. By the way, I think it's going to be, it can be easier to use. And one of my goals is to make it easier to use, but even still, if that's a barrier, you can still move into alternative currencies. And I really recommend these gold backs and even physical silver. I don't have one on me. I've got like a fifth in here in New Hampshire. We have 1/10 of an ounce or 1/5 of an ounce. Like you can get silver and gold. And there's another thing, and not to get too complicated about it, but there's kind of a way to merge technology, that physical metals and crypto that get the benefits of each, which is that you basically create tokens that represent gold and silver, and then you can trade those. So you get the benefit of having the electronic version so that you can make small payments. You can make them all over the world cheaply, but they're actually backed by these metals, and where there's a mechanism where you can actually exchange your digital tokens for physical metals, so that if there's any concern about whether or not the tokens themselves have any legitimacy behind it. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking about, is how do we bridge physical and digital so that it's self-custody and easy to use for everybody? Because technological understanding should not be a barrier. People should not have to be technologically sophisticated to use money. Money is for everyone. And money is just simply a medium of exchange that allows people to engage in voluntary relationships. It should be easy. It should be completely accessible, and it should not be controlled by governments or central banks, because government controlled money has been the single largest driver of global tyranny in all of human history.
We have here, I think it's popped up. So purchasing goldbacks right here. It says Nevada Goldback, $8.72 or $6.40 on eBay. Here's Etsy 2024 Nevada Goldback, $8.59, $9.47. It's a variety. What do you suggest if people wanted to buy goldbacks? There's a website, I think here, goldback.com, where to buy goldbacks. Are there scams out there that they've got to look out for? People selling goldbacks that potentially, are scams. Where should they go? Do you have any suggestions on people that are listening where they should, apparently, try to purchase some of these things just to have in their back pocket?
Yeah, I can post a link for where I get it. I'm fortunate. There are 6 Goldback physical stores in the United States. One of them is in New Hampshire, and a friend of mine who's a fellow Free Stater actually runs the New Hampshire one. So I can actually go to a physical location, but I also have an account, so I can send you the link that I use.
Put it in private chat, so that way I can put it to all the platforms.
Okay.
On the right-hand side, there should be a little private chat there.
All right, let me let's keep. I'm gonna have to look up the link, but which I will do as we're talking.
Sure, because there's obviously scams out there as well. There seems to be scams for everything. Every time something goes on, there's, a whole bunch of people that want to cash in by scamming people. Unfortunately, that's kind of the shitty, matrix system that we're in. So, I've heard lots of different places that people get scammed buying this and buying that, that we want to obviously protect people from that, especially if they're trying to, help us all exit the system.
Yes, literally anything can be a scam, and this is why I say self custody, but also you have to be careful. Reagan once famously said, "Trust but verify." I actually say, "Don't trust and then verify," because we're at a point right now where we're at low trust for all institutions and all organizations. When I approach anything, even when I'm using crypto, I do test transactions. I send a small amount before I send a larger amount. Like what I have to do to live on crypto, gold, and silver isn't really, it's not user friendly, and most people would not be interested in doing it. Which is, by the way, why we need to make it simpler, because there are scams everywhere. Crypto has been filled with it. The history of gold, I actually have a chapter on this in my book on gold and silver, but ever since the beginning of time, people have been debasing gold. They have been, sorry, I'm still looking for this link. They've been debasing gold. They have been painting rocks. You had services, vaults that started. And the idea was, well, hey, look, I'll start a business and I'll provide the security and I'll manage this stuff properly. And then ultimately they then started creating gold certificates backed by people's gold, where people are able to earn interest. And then it turns out there was no fractional reserve method. And so people were printing more gold certificates than there was actual gold. And then those collapsed. So you have to do homework, and then you actually have to be careful that the links that you're clicking on are actually the links to the place that you think that you're going, and not links that will redirect you to another scam. This is part of what I'm doing when I do these workshops. I'm also, because what I do changes like every 90 days. What I was doing a year ago in terms of living off crypto is completely different than what it is today. Like I said, I went from 100% crypto to 50-50 crypto, gold and silver, 50% gold and silver, 50% crypto. And actually part of that is I actually have an account through Goldback, and I can load gold and silver onto a debit card and use a debit card that's backed by gold and silver. So that's one of the things that I've been experimenting with recently. So, but as I'm telling you this now, what I'm saying is I'm experimenting with this now. I'm not saying go out and 100% do this. I'm saying I've been doing this for 60 days. It's been working so far, but what I do is I let everybody that I know that in my workshops, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm tried now. This worked, this didn't work. And I kind of give people a rolling update on what's going on. So I say it's a moving situation. I used to have a debit card that I used with crypto. I used it for 5 years. And when the banks collapsed in the US last year, I got 8 days worth of advance notice that my card was going to be unusable, and that the banking relationship that they had dissolved. And they said, and they're going to bring it back in 90 days. And that was 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. So like, it's almost like living in a video game. And I know this isn't like, I'm not trying to sell it or glorify this. It is not easy living on these alternative assets, and it's become more difficult, but it's still worth it. And now kind of part of my mission with this is to make this easier, but you have to be vigilant on literally all of this stuff, because there are scams everywhere, literally everywhere. And in the book, I even describe, like, so there are certain things, if it's a US minted gold or silver, then it actually fits under this thing that Reagan passed in 1986, where it actually serves as legal tender. And different states have different laws in the US. There are a lot of states right now that are working on getting gold and silver passed as legal tender. 6 states have already done this. So a lot of this varies, and you're in Canada. So I don't even know, as much as I'm saying this, and I don't know how much of your audience is actually from Canada. I should probably have researched
very international. We have people from US, Canada, Europe, Australia. So we're everywhere. So you got like a very wide range of people that's listening to this.
All right. So because I don't know what the laws are there with respect to silver and gold. I actually don't know the history of that or what the issues are around that. Do you know?
No, all I know is that Trudeau's dad sold our country out to the Federal Reserve, to the federal banking. We used to print our own money, and we didn't have any debt. And then as soon as he decided to go with the banking system, for them to print our money, now obviously our debt's out of control like everywhere else. But I'm not sure about when the gold was actually taken from the people.
I'm sending you one link now, and I'm still looking for the other one, which I will find here shortly. So these links are to sign up directly from Alpine. So the history behind this is this. Utah was the first state in the United States to pass a law making gold and silver legal tender. They passed this law in 2011. And so with that, there was a group called UPMA, United Precious Metals Association, which essentially created the first bank in the United States that is backed by gold and silver. And it is based in Utah. So they have a vault in Utah where they store the gold backs, and the silver. And then this is where you can create an account. And then at that account, you can set up a debit card. It's a really interesting situation, and I won't get into too much of the weeds, but basically there are pawn shops, and I'm sure there are pawn shops probably everywhere. But what you can actually do is pawn your own gold to yourself and then not pay it back. And so this gets you out of having to pay capital gains tax. It's a really interesting, it's interesting as a concept. So the first link that I sent you is to set up an account through the Goldback Bank if people are interested in that. And I'm finding that to be very useful. And then I'm trying to find this other link to actually just buy Goldbacks directly from these people and have them send them to you. Now, I don't know what the implications are of shipping or all of that other stuff. So I'm going to say in advance that all of this is based on my experience in the United States and my experience in New Hampshire, which may turn out to be not, may not apply well in Canada. And it's something that I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I'll look into it. Because I think these Goldbacks, they make them in 6 different states. The ones that I have actually, are these even new? Yeah, these are New Hampshire, but the company that makes the technology itself is actually working with other countries as well. So there's an ability to utilize this technology to make all kinds of different designs. But what's interesting is each one of these bills has its own serial number. So there's some interesting videos you can look at on YouTube for the manufacturing process. Like I found these things to be, amazing that, they finally answered the question. Because every time you talk to somebody about, oh yeah, gold and silver, people will say, well, what am I going to do? Shave off gold and go buy a dozen eggs? And it turns out they appear to have fixed that problem. So I think it's a pretty cool invention.
Do they have silverbacks?
They made a silverback. They made like 10,000 of them, I think. But the problem was it's too expensive, because if you think about, so 1/1000th of an ounce of silver is worth, whatever, fractions of a cent. So the actual production cost of creating a bill in the form of 1/1000th of an ounce of silver isn't worth it. It isn't cost effective.
Well, I don't think they'd have to go 1/1000th, right? If it was silver and it's only $20, you could go 120, or 100 at the less, to have actual, trading stuff for food, not to go that 1/1000th would be like 10 cents or whatever, wouldn't be worth it. But I'm wondering just about the silver. So it's the gold that's better because it's the high value and it makes it worth it more?
Yeah, I mean, gold is whatever whatever it is right now, $2,500 or so. I don't even know what the current price. We're roughly $2,500, $2,300, whereas per ounce, whereas silver's 30. So I mean, if you think about that, it's kind of it's hard to make it work. But hopefully, um, hopefully they'll make that work moving forward. But again, I've used these 1/10 ounce little physical pieces of silver that are kind of put into like these little flat. They're actually square. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a reason that they need to be square, but 1/10 of an ounce of silver is $3. So you have a gold back. Now, what I can do with my gold back account is if there are merchants that are connected that take gold backs, I can actually pay through my online account. So I can actually pay somebody with a fraction of a gold back online, but there aren't many merchants doing that yet. It's still kind of early. There are 150 in New Hampshire and there are 2,000 nationwide. But moving forward, what I want to do and what I've presented as an idea is to actually tokenize these gold backs. So imagine a situation where you're a retailer, you're selling something through your website, you're taking multiple forms of cryptocurrency, tokenized gold, tokenized silver, and you can behind the scenes convert. So let's say you accept Monero, but then the Monero gets settled into your account as a gold token. And then you can take something that looks like a credit card, but that's not. It's an NFC card and go to a gold back ATM and actually withdraw physical gold backs. That's the kind of thing that I'm trying to figure out how to build. And by the way, there are gold back ATMs that just launched. I think they have them in Las Vegas, North Carolina. They're only like a handful of them. And so that's really early, but think about, and, I'm kind of like, well, that might be stolen. I mean, there are a lot of security issues that I'm thinking about this, but the idea that there are places in the United States that you can go and put in cash and get back gold backs is phenomenal.
Now, someone asked earlier, what do you think of Sam Bankman-Fried and, that all that transpired there? Was that just another political show? Was it another crypto type of thing? Because it seems like the stuff that gets this big attention in, the media is usually manufactured.
So when I go and I give talks, I don't just do 4-hour workshops. I give talks of various size. And so when I get outside of my own Liberty, crypto community, more people have heard of Sam Bankman-Fried than heard of Satoshi Nakamoto, who's the, anonymous character behind Bitcoin. Most people don't know that you can use crypto to buy and sell things. They only know it as a speculative asset. And and generally 2/3 or more have a negative opinion of it as a speculative investment. That's just the reality of what most people think about this. I think Sam Bankman-Fried, I looked into his family. I mean, I think the whole thing was, it's either a psyop or it's one of those things where it's such a profound lack of judgment that if you look at some of the most sophisticated investors in the world put hundreds of millions of dollars invested into Sam Bankman-Fried. And if you just did a simple amount of due diligence and research, you would have found that this company was not what it said it was. I mean, it did not take a lot of homework. So either people got caught up in the hype or it was a money laundering scheme. Now, I happen to think what people who maybe haven't followed it very closely, Sam Bankman-Fried was meeting with the SEC and he was meeting with members of Congress to draft legislation that would have benefited FTX and would have harmed people that are using cryptocurrency for direct transactions. So what's ironic about this is the biggest fraud in all of crypto was the one who was actually working on drafting legislation to regulate all of the other bad actors. I think the fact that, he got 25 years, but somehow this goes back to this whole issue of manufactured polarity. There's this Republican, Tom Emmer, who is like the head of one of the committees that he wrote the anti-CBDC bill, and he acts like he's Mr. Pro Crypto. He took hundreds of thousands of dollars in political contributions from Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX for himself and for organizations he's affiliated with, and he never returned the money. All of the millions of dollars that went to politicians, I think most of it was not returned. I don't know what the percentage of it was, but even some of these so-called pro-crypto Republicans didn't return the money. So I think that, he probably had the goods on a lot of people. And I think this was used. I think that he was brought in, whether he was intentionally from the beginning brought in for this or whether he was used for this purpose, but he was going to be used to regulate crypto directly through his participation with Congress and regulators. And then indirectly, he's been used to regulate crypto by being found to be a scam, even though the politicians that took money from him saw absolutely no penalties. And my guess is they will all be reelected in November.
Yeah, I didn't hear about the Republican side, but I heard that, he had donated hundreds of millions of dollars to the Democratic side, and it was kind of a money laundering scheme in order to get money into the politicians' hands, through that company.
Well, I mean, it was mostly Democrats, but it was also Republicans. And that's the thing that people need to understand. And this is a common situation in Washington, D.C., is it's basically a system that operates on mutual blackmail. So it's kind of like these things when the Me Too movement happened, all of a sudden we find out that there's a congressional slush fund used for paying off and settling these kinds of sexual harassment cases behind the scenes, right? So it's like they each have blackmail on each other. So no one ever gets held responsible because they each have dirt on the other side. That's effectively what happened with Sam Bankman-Fried, even though Bankman-Fried's family, and I actually looked at their website and books and everything else that they wrote, were huge Democrats. I think his father or mother, I can't even remember which one, but wrote healthcare policy. These guys were working on a lot of things related to the pandemic and a lot of, I think the father was working on this idea that you should he was trying to figure out how to automate the tax collection process. And this whole altruism movement, effective altruism movement, is basically an ideology that says the ends justify the means. And Bankman-Fried learned this from his parents. And so literally he was instilled with this idea. He probably still doesn't think he's guilty. He thinks that he's one of the elite. He went to MIT. He's one of the people that's supposed to save the world. And if there's collateral damage, it's okay as long as the net good outweighs the bad. That's literally what the ideology is behind this. And by the way, this fits in perfectly with technocracy. When you read the books and the works of his parents, these people don't have any remorse for what happened. They feel like this was perfectly justified. And that's something that I think is hard for probably your audience and hard for me. And it's hard for people that believe in free will and individual rights. It's hard to really truly internalize the fact that the people that we're up against literally don't care about our opinion on these issues, and they don't care about natural law or any of these things as a fundamental concept. And you can read it in their books. I wish I could remember it now, but you can Google Sam Bankman-Fried's parents and find the books. And when you see the book, just the cover of the book and the table of contents, I think the stuff is on Amazon. You will be truly horrified. And look at this is a kid who was indoctrinated by his parents, who are both Stanford professors, was put on ADHD meds early, and was just so heavily medicated that you would see him doing interviews where either he didn't have his meds or he had too many meds, and he's literally shaking and vibrating in his chair. I mean, in a sense, I think Sam Bankman-Fried probably isn't very much in control of his own. Talk about somebody who's been programmed. I think Bankman-Fried has been programmed. The question is, who programmed him and why? His girlfriend that worked at FTX, we tracked down. Her father was a professor at MIT that literally worked on basically population health strategies or propaganda to figure out how to maximize the uptake of people taking vaccines. And this is literally who these people are. So I mean, I went down a whole rabbit hole with this, and I'm, I can't say that I'm surprised. I guess I'm not really surprised by the outcome, but him getting 25 years in prison is not justice, because the real crime was the stranglehold on Congress and what the downstream effects have been, because it's tainted people's perspective of crypto. More people associate crypto with Sam Bankman-Fried, and Sam Bankman-Fried was just a parasite brought in, 10 years after after crypto, was already out there being used as peer-to-peer digital cash. And so he has nothing to do with the essence of cryptocurrency in any way, shape, or form.
Would you equate it to 9/11 and how the freedoms were taken away? Same kind of thing, but in the crypto space?
Yeah, and it's been used to embolden Biden's executive order 14067. So before Roger was thrown in prison, there were other people that were running what are called coin mixing services. So Bitcoin's this open ledger, and some people were like, well, look, maybe people don't want their transactions tracked, so we'll mix a bunch of people's transactions together to try to make it less clear. And one of the guys that created, or two people that created services like this, were arrested recently, and are facing significant jail time. One guy, I think, was just sentenced to 62 months in prison just for creating a coin mixing service. The SEC has cracked down on over 127 companies. The CFTC, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, just last year alone, had actions against 47 companies. The largest ever settlement in the history of the United States Treasury, $4 billion, was leveled against Binance, which was one of the largest crypto exchanges. And the CEO of that exchange is currently serving a 4-month prison sentence. All of this has happened actually in a 90-day period of time. And in that same 90-day period of time, all of the remaining crypto exchanges in the US are being sued. The IRS has stated that you have to now report self-custody crypto holdings. And the FBI has said, if you buy crypto from a service that isn't a registered money transmitter, and it turns out the coins that you buy are in a pool of coins that were involved in illegal activity, they can claw back your coins and all of the other coins in that pool. This is just in the last 90 days. And so I say it's DEFCON 1 because the reason they're doing all of this is because they're rolling out CBDCs. If only 1% of Americans are using crypto to buy something, and that's just to buy something, not to buy everything, then crypto's not really a threat at this particular moment in time. So why, with all of the other things going on in the world, is the DOJ putting all of this attention? Why are they extorting people with fake cases and trying to get information here and there? And it's because shutting off the alternative is necessary to roll out CBDCs, because when they roll out CBDCs, it's not going to be hey, this is optional. It's not going to be like the shots. Here, have a donut or, a large fry and take the shot. They're going to roll it out under some emergency, and your choices are going to be lose all of your money or convert it to CBDCs. And so they need to make sure that there isn't an alternative when they go to do that, which is why I think we are closer to this happening than anybody is aware of, and that I would like, because I don't even know if we have enough time to offboard or get people out of the system at this point, but I'm going to do everything I can to spread the word.
Now, when you mention the end justifies the means, that's almost like their communitarian model about the needs of the many outweigh the individual rights. So basically, it's what's good for the greater good. It doesn't matter if it's no good for you type of scenario or model that they're trying to implement. Heath Diane asks, can goldbacks be bought and spent in states that don't issue goldbacks?
So this is a state by state issue. The way that I look at it is this, and I'm not, don't hold me to this as I'm not a lawyer, but if you can find someone who's willing to accept it, then you can use it. The big issue really comes around taxation. So some states have, like for instance, I gave a workshop in California, and in California you have to pay a sales tax when you buy gold and silver. It's like 8% or something, unless you buy $2,000 or more. So in some states, there's a sales tax. In some states, you have to pay a capital gains tax. So if you buy gold and the gold goes up in value and you spend the gold, then you have to report a capital gains. If you held it for more than a year, you have to pay capital gains on the increase in the value. Some states that have passed it as legal tender have no capital gains and no sales tax. And so I would advise you on that. But I think in general, there's nothing against using it. But there are different rules and regulations around barter and how you have to handle for taxation purposes barter arrangements. One thing that I find is interesting, because remember, the way we're going to get this to happen is this has got to be a grassroots movement. So it's like, you make the decision that, all right, I'm going to start today. I'm going to buy some gold backs, or I'm going to buy some crypto, whatever it is, and I'm going to try to use it. Just buy one thing with it. Just start with one thing. You don't have to go, do what I did and just get rid of everything and go all in on this. Just try one thing. Because one thing that I found, and I posted pictures around this, the gold backs in particular, I will tip people with gold backs everywhere I go. If I get a haircut, I'll tip, the barber with gold backs. Maybe I'll give them, and then I'll take a picture, and inevitably they're always smiling when they get the picture, and then I explain to them what it is, and then they can do research, because everybody understands what gold is, and everybody understands what a bill is. And so, and then I give them my card, and then they can go look at my website and learn more about all of this stuff, all of these alternative currencies. That's a great way to just get going. Just get a few gold backs. This isn't like you don't have to put all of your net worth in it. Buy $50 worth of gold backs. This doesn't have to be just, in fact, I take baby steps, get comfortable with it, test it out, research it. I wouldn't advise that anybody go all in, but I would advise you to take the first step immediately. Just take one small step, because what you want to do is you want to be comfortable with these things for when they do roll out the emergency. You're like, oh yeah, I've done this before. I've done a transaction here. I've done this here. I know how this works. And then you'll be like, okay, now that we're in an emergency, now I'm going to go all in. But I think the sooner people can make that first step, the sooner we're going to have, the better we're going to have, like an army of people when the emergency happens, that can help onboard others into these alternative currencies.
Have you ever heard of the Zimbabwe Zim bonds? And, some people are saying that, they're going to be worth something huge. Thoughts on that, if you've heard of it? And if not, I just got one last question. I know you got to take care of your throat. We got another interview in about 45 minutes. So thought on Zim bonds, and then I have one last question.
The Zim, are these the things that are backed by gold? I've
apparently it's backed by gold. Some Zim bond, or quadrillion dollars for a Zim bond, but somehow some people are saying that this is the next wave of gold backed currency.
So this is my belief on this, but of course I could be wrong, although I'm not wrong on at least what's happened historically. Every fiat currency and every government controlled currency, even gold and silver backed, has failed in human history. It has a 0% success rate. So my guess is that what's going to happen with the Zimbabwe thing is that they're going to say it's backed by gold, and then all of a sudden they're going to stop doing audits, and you're not going to be able to find out how much gold they actually have in reserves. And then at some point in time, it's going to be separated from actually being backed by gold. Because remember, until it was 1971 or 1972, the US dollar was backed by gold. So a government currency can go from being backed by gold to not being backed by gold, literally by presidential edict. Like one day, Nixon's just like, yeah, no, we're not on this, right? So based on the track record of Zimbabwe and the fact that, as I'm looking this on my screen, I know they had the $100 trillion note, and they're one of the examples that I have in my book of hyperinflation. I would be skeptical. I want to go back to, I don't want a piece of paper that says that it's backed by gold. I would prefer to have the actual gold itself. And what I've been talking about in terms of tokenizing gold, and working with third parties, even then, I would keep a minimal amount tokenized and keep most of it in physical possession. So that's my take on that. But do your own homework, always.
Last question. We interviewed Justin Leslie, who was the Pfizer whistleblower. He went inside there, did the whole thing with that one guy who was saying that, that directed evolution, all that kind of stuff. He kind of got screwed over by, the people that, kind of brought him in there. He mentioned to ask you about Mike Gill. I'm not sure what that means to you. He said something that you just to ask you of what that means to you.
Yeah, I put I don't normally like to talk about this publicly, but I will. I ended up in 5 years worth of defamation lawsuits as a co-defendant with Mike Gill. And this guy is out there with this story that he turned down a $50 million settlement offer because he was fighting corruption. And then he lost these defamation suits and he lost $274 million. And it's all false. And I have put together, we did a 4 to 5 hour Twitter space with myself, my wife, and 2 other people that have been defamed by Mike. And I lay out all of the lawsuits with links to all of the source material with all of Mike's previous lawsuits. So he was never offered $50 million. He doesn't have the information that he claims about a drug cartel. And he just inserts himself in these stories. And what's challenging about it is he's been defaming me every day for 7 years. And the challenge that I have with it is he's already owes $400 million in these judgments. And so I actually literally can't sue him. There's nothing to sue. If you sue him, he doesn't show up to court, or he claims the court process is rigged. So the reason I don't normally engage in this is because all he wants is attention. And the more attention you give him, that gives him the ability to create and manufacture another story. Now, the reason that he was asking me about this is that part of Mike's story was that I worked for James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. And I think that's probably why he was asking the question. I never worked for Project Veritas. I know James O'Keefe. James O'Keefe has stayed at my house because I was the chair of the Free State Project, and he spoke at one of our events in the winter, and his plane was canceled, and so he actually stayed at my house. I've never worked with James O'Keefe. I introduced James O'Keefe to Mike Gill one time. Mike has only met James O'Keefe once. James looked at Mike's claims and decided not to take on the case. So James has never filmed anyone. He's never recorded anyone regarding what Mike is talking about. And in fact, Mike has resurfaced with notoriety because he claimed that James O'Keefe was fired from Project Veritas related to his evidence, which we now know that is clearly absolutely not the case. And there's all kinds of documentation on why James was fired from Project Veritas. So I would say stay clear of Mike, because he's continuing to make defamatory statements. And what I learned, because I actually, through my insurance company, paid out almost $2.5 million. I spent 5.5 years of my life as a conspirator. What I was charged with was not making defamatory statements. It was conspiracy to make defamatory statements. So they actually tried to hold me financially liable for Mike's statements, not even my own statements. 5.5 years in lawsuits. There was never a deposition. There was never even a trial. It was all back and forth, motion play. Everything even went up to the state Supreme Court. It was the 2 separate lawsuits. It was a horrible experience. But I understand that when Mike continues to make these defamatory statements, when people share his statements, they're actually committing conspiracy to commit defamation. If you are knowingly sharing false defamatory material that somebody has been found guilty of sharing and actually owes $400 million, then you actually can be sued for conspiracy. And the reason that I know that is that my insurance company paid out close to $2.5 million for just that very thing. I didn't even think that kind of thing was possible. So I'd be happy to talk to him. If he wants to talk to me about this in depth, one-on-one, I'd be happy to go through all of that. But I would encourage him to stay away from Mike Gill, because he will try to rope him into the narrative and then claim that, it's a long story, but I avoid him at all costs, because in 17 years, there isn't a single employee, corruption victim, lawyer, or family member that will vouch for Mike Gill. And so he's ruined and destroyed multiple people's lives. And so I would avoid you to stay away from him at all costs.
Well, thank you for sharing that, because we've had people in the comments and say, you need to interview Mike Gill. He's discrediting people we're having on here. He knows the real truth. But if he's really, someone not to be trusted, then him discrediting someone else should hold little to zero value if it's coming from him, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'll let me do this. I'll send you the link to the Twitter space that we did, because I made it, I'm trying to fight CBDCs. And so I could very easily have just gone and done a whole tour of podcasts just to talk about Mike Gill. And I actually don't it's a distraction because Mike is still trying to extract a $50 million settlement offer from people. He's basically hoping that if he guesses right once about corruption, people will pay him to shut up. And so he's like roping people into this. It's the most bizarre. There will be a Netflix series about this at some point. My wife and I have actually talked about this. It's kind of a phenomenal thing, but I've sent a link there with all of the information. There's another guy named Gary Snedeker who has done he spent a month researching Gil because he had Gil on his show. And then shortly after, which got like 60,000 views. And then shortly after he had Gil on his show, Mike blocked him and started attacking him. And so Gary was trying to find out what all of this was about. And so he spent a month doing due diligence. He read all the court documents. He reached out to lawyers. One of the things that Mike claims is that he has Pandora's box and he's involved with the Pandora's papers. He's not at all. And in fact, this Snedeker guy actually reached out directly to the people behind the Pandora papers, and they've said that they've never heard of him and he has nothing to do with any of it. So between the link that I just sent you and the Snedeker link, there's like 6 or 8 hours worth of material, but also links to the lawsuits and links to all of the source material. So I encourage, if you don't believe me, literally look up the court documents yourself. You will never find an example ever of where Mike Gill has received a settlement offer for $50 million. He actually tried to, in my opinion, extort his lawyers and said, unless you give me $50 million, I'm going to do A, B, and C. And they said no. And then it got into a lawsuit. Mike lost. He lost the appeal. I think Mike has hired and fired over 80 lawyers throughout the years. I think he's 0-29 in court cases. He's a serial litigator. The situation is so bizarre. But, we talked earlier about kind of believing people or not believing people, like this whole thing with technocracy. The hard part of it is, are people good or are people bad? It never occurred to me that a person like Mike Gill would exist that would actually put together something called a state of corruption for the purpose of getting people who are actually corruption victims to give him information that he could then use as leverage to try to extract a settlement offer from his lawyers, who he was trying to blame for the fact that he didn't pay taxes on stuff going all the way back to 2006. Anyway, it's a long story, and I don't want to hijack this with that, but I would be happy to reach out, and if you want to connect me with Justin, I'd be happy to talk to him about it, because to the extent he's about to walk into this, he's going to get shredded. It's going to be a disaster for him.
Sure. And the last, I just want to wrap it up with a question about him. Is there any chance that he was actually inserted to cause all this disruption, to cause people in the movement to expose, to do these bad things? Because it doesn't seem like, he's has any success, but it seems like something's keeping him going. And is that maybe what he was maybe brought in to do?
Who, Mike?
Yeah.
So it took me 7 years, 5.5 years of which I was in these lawsuits and looking through legal documents to understand what was motivating all of this. So I'll give you the simple form of it. The simple form of it was this: he was a mortgage broker in New England, had one of the largest mortgage brokerage companies in New England. Was involved in doing things like 40-year adjustable rate mortgages and all these other, high quality things that people have come to hate. But he was successful at it, made a lot of money at it. And he took $40 million from his mortgage business and put it into a horse racing business. He became one of the winningest owners of thoroughbred racehorses. But then I believe he was found guilty of drugging horses. At one point, he was banned from the industry. Jockeys refused to ride his horses. And at about that same time, the mortgage industry collapsed. So he didn't pay taxes on the $40 million. And two things were happening. When the mortgage industry collapsed, the banking department was going after him because of, there's a whole long list of it, and it's in this link that I sent you. Things like signing people's mortgages for them, signing people's documents for them. I think there was something, I can't remember if it was money laundering. There's a whole long list of things. And he was facing criminal penalties from the New Hampshire banking department, and he was facing criminal penalties from the IRS. So he was looking at jail time, and he was looking at jail time just at the time when both of his revenue streams collapsed. So what he did was he sued his lawyers for $50 million because he didn't have the ability to actually satisfy his debts. And then and then when he lost that, he was still in the situation of owing the IRS money, still fighting with the banking department. He had resolved one issue, but it turns out this was a relapse of various issues. So he was looking at having his banking license and therefore ability to do mortgages revoked. So he created State of Corruption to get people to come to him with stories of corruption. So he had these electronic billboards where he would put politicians and other people up there and he would say corruption, but and so he's painted himself out to be this big anti-corruption crusader, but in reality, he owed the New Hampshire tax authorities. He owed his ex-wife. I think he wasn't even paying, some of his kids' medical bills. He owed a whole bunch of people money, and rather than pay off his debts, he was spending all of his money on electronic billboards and doing Facebook and YouTube ads defaming people for the purpose of trying to extract information that he could use to extract a settlement so that he could buy his way out of his issues with the IRS and the banking department. It took me 7 years to figure that out, but it's now all thoroughly well documented. So the issue that I have is, and inevitably, there's only one person that continues to platform him. Everybody else that's platformed him has ultimately reached out to me and that they've apologized. Again, this is the first time I've publicly on video talked about it. But everybody else is actually, because they become part of this thing. They become part of this of the solution. Everybody who's ever had him on ends up becoming, they're part of, whatever the manufactured story is. You're either part of Project Veritas, you're part of Michael Flynn, whatever it is that gets him the most media exposure, because that happens to be the topic of the day. We used to have an opioid crisis. That was the issue. Then it was J6 and he inserted himself in that. Then he inserted himself in the Pandora's Papers. You think that this guy's Forrest Gump based on the fact that he ends up being in all these different situations. But the reality is he's not a principal actor in any of it. He just inserts himself in it. And people think he's an expert because he's talking about these things. And in the meantime, he just cycles through and damages people. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, he's caused people to lose custody of their kids and become home. Like it's a horror. He's blamed people. He's stated that I've tried to have him assassinated multiple times. He's accused me of working with people I'd never met before on trying to assassinate him. It's absolutely absurd. But my normal approach to this is to just document all the evidence. And now other people have independently documented it. And then I refer people to that so that I'm not, spending 5 hours going all over the internet every time trying to explain the story. But I will tell you, it's kind of, have you ever seen that movie, 6 Degrees of Separation? Have you ever seen that? I kind of feel like that. My wife and I, sometimes if we, end up in a social situation or when we're meeting people and they've talked about this, I'm like, wow, let me tell you, because they ask you, well, what about Mike Gill? I'm like, well, let me tell you. And like 4 hours later, people are like, you've got to be kidding me. So, it definitely has some entertainment value. I'm glad I'm not as into it as I was in terms of being in these lawsuits, but boy, is it's a hell of a story. But I've never seen somebody with such a complete lack of regard. And what he does is he preys on people that are in a weakened state, tries to act like he has some shared sympathy, and then throws them under the bus. So it's amazing. I encourage people to dig into the facts of it.
I guess I'll know your answer, but someone just sent me Mike Hill's phone number and I was going to ask to interview him, but you're probably thinking I should stay clear.
Well, certainly you can do whatever you want, but understand that if you amplify somebody who owes $400 million for making defamatory statements, and that he still hasn't paid those judgments, and then you give him a platform, you open yourself up for legal liability for committing conspiracy to commit defamation. So I will let you do your own research on that. I don't know if this is different because you're in Canada, but I don't think that there's any ROI for you to do this. And actually it's caused me. So when you look at my links and everything else, you'll find, because I see some of the comments, hear from people. This is the problem with this. People can, if they dominate if you repeat a lie enough time, people will start believing it. And so the question is, well, so how much of my life am I supposed to spend defending myself against lies made by somebody who literally has lost 29 lawsuits and owes $400 million. The problem is that we live in a time and an era where people will continue to believe this. You know, in 7 years, there are people in the comments that'll probably say bad things about me. None of them have ever asked me for my side of the story, or none of them have asked James O'Keefe for his side of the story. No one has fact checked anything. And this is the problem, is that to the extent that the mainstream media is pure propaganda, independent media has no standards for actually doing any fact checking whatsoever. I've seen one person makes one comment, and then all of a sudden that gets amplified, and it's like the telephone game. 5 podcasts later, this has turned into some whole massive conspiracy, and it's all built on the fact that no one has done any independent research to validate any of the claims made. And I will say, anytime you hear somebody say they're a whistleblower or they're talking to an insider, unless there's a verifiable fact, I would look at that very skeptically, right? Because that's the easiest way to send misinformation. It's like, oh, unnamed sources, or I know this person, right? You see this stuff here. It's like, oh, this person is JFK Jr. didn't die, and this person is this and this. And then all of a sudden these whole cults get built around this, these whole narratives, and people, again, manufactured polarity. Now somebody's on the side of, is JFK Jr. still alive or not? Is this, or this? And now all of a sudden there are hundreds of thousands of people that have made a red versus blue decision on something that was completely fabricated. And so that's been eye-opening to me with respect to seeing, Mike get traction, but understand he's gotten shut down on all of the platforms except for one. And I've even sent her a cease and desist. It was just, I don't, defamation lawsuits take like 3 years, and I'm really not interested in having to go through the courts. If I have to, I will, but it's like the last thing I have the time to do. But ultimately, since I can't sue Mike because he owes $400 million, then even for me, if the only way for me to actually stop the defamatory material is to go after the people that are willfully sharing the defamatory material. So
yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. I'm not interested anymore. I didn't know about any of this. All I heard was he was discrediting some people we had on, and they said, you need to talk to Mike. You need to talk to Mike about this stuff. So I just got his phone number, and I was going to reach out to him, but now I'm not really interested, because if someone is that much, disinformation, then, I don't want to be involved into any of that kind of stuff.
Well, the wild thing is, if you text him and you say something like, he'll take your text, and then he'll post your text out of context, and then he'll claim you are part of the Flynn network or part of a cartel. Like, literally, he does that. If you actually watch his tweets, it's the most bizarre thing, because he'll say something and then he'll show something on the screen, and the two things don't even match up, but people believe it because of the sincerity with which he makes the statement. It's phenomenal. Again, there'll probably be a Netflix series about this at some point.
What you talked about earlier is repeaters. There's a lot of people that are repeaters out there. They'll just hear something from someone with no actual or factual evidence behind it, and then they'll repeat it, and then it gets repeated by a bunch of people. And then there's so much disinformation swimming out there just because someone repeated something that they actually had no evidence behind. So there's lots of repeater misinformation out there, and the people think it's fact because they saw someone make a trash video about somebody and it looked so real, but there was no actual evidence behind it. And I think that's one big problem why there's so much disconnect in, the truth, the freedom movements and all that, is because there's a lot of repeaters that repeat bad information with no actual factual evidence behind it.
That's most of it. So this is why it's like we're starved for any factual. So what can you trust? And I mean, I see people get so interested in these alt media things. And it's like, yeah, my guess is some of it is actually, the alt media is probably hijacked for specific propaganda purposes. But then some of the more independent stuff, it's like, yeah, how do you put people on? And it's not even just that they don't do fact checking, but they'll allow somebody on to say something about somebody, and then they'll repeat the thing and then not actually get the other person's side of it. That's the part of it that's just, and then when they get the person's other side, or they get factual information that refutes what the person's saying, and they still amplify it anyway because it drives traffic. This is why we're in a completely ridiculous scenario right now. So but again, I'll talk to Justin and whoever else it was, but my advice is ignore him, because all of the stuff that he's doing is literally to generate drama. He doesn't actually have any factual evidence that is going to be used to fight any corruption. He's literally, at this point, he has nothing to lose. So, allegedly he hasn't seen his kids in years, hasn't been in New Hampshire in years, and he owes over $400 million. So every time he makes up a new story or creates a new story, understand that this is coming from somebody that has nothing to lose and has a 17-year track record of leaving corpses and victims in his wake. So, and it only gets worse each time it gets ratcheted up.
That's why earlier on, Astrid PP from our Rumble said, what if the deep state is lawfaring him? What if he made a deal with when he owed all these money to go spread, to cause problems? What if, that was kind of, his way out of some of these, legal issues that he had, was to cause problems with people that are trying to become awake and aware to what's going on?
That's possible. I mean, his behavior is the same now as it's been since I've known him, but that is possible. Because again, once you consider what he's saying, he's out there saying that he's fighting a cartel. Like, if this guy was out there actually fighting a cartel, like, he wouldn't be out actually talking about this. And so he could be there specific, and he's doing a good job. I mean, I don't know much about Arizona, but I know right now he's in Arizona creating all kinds of chaos there. And so people have reached out to me, and they start trying to tell me the story. And I'm like, I honestly don't know what's going on in Arizona, but I know Mike's MO is to try to stir up chaos and to try to make his narrative stick, because he's still trying to get a settlement offer. Like literally the thing that he's pitching right now is, if I can make enough noise and if I'm right, somebody's going to pay me to stop talking. That's what this guy's got left at this point in time.
Freemason motto, order out of chaos.
Yep.
So kind of crazy. Anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap this up?
No, I would just say, check out daylightfreedom.org, which is where I have all of my stuff, my interviews and books and information about the workshops. And look, even as you bring up this Mike thing, the only thing that we can actually change is our own thoughts, our own actions, and our own emotions. Like, these systems, these rigged political things, picking sides here, there, none of that matters. We do have the ability to change our own actions. And so that's where I want to focus my time. And to the extent I can help people with some of this stuff as it relates to money, great, but there's certainly other areas to do that. And the more of us that can work together and, kind of try to lead our way out of this through voluntary exchange, the better off we are.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a breath of fresh air. Some of the things were obviously talked about, not the happiest things, but, these are things that we do need to talk about, and people do need to be awake and aware to what is going on. And I really appreciate your honesty and just coming here as a man, speaking to us here as the audience about what you see is going on and how you think that we can get our way out of this tyrannical situation we're in.
Well, happy to do it. And I'm dedicated to trying to get this word out. So I think this is the biggest threat to free will. So I'm going to keep doing it until I can't do it anymore.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing this on your YouTube and your Twitter. We've got 450 people here live with us right now. Please check us out if you're, from Aaron's channels, The Missing Link Live. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn. Our YouTube channel just got another strike, so we're 2 weeks off of YouTube. That's why we're on our backup YouTube channel right now, the High Vibe Love Tribe. Twitch, Twitter, and Rumble. We're going to have SGN on next in about 17 minutes to hear what he thinks is going on. So thanks again, Aaron. You have a wonderful afternoon. Keep up the fight. May the source be with you and protection around you during this pivotal time in history.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Knowledge is power. The more knowledge we all have collectively, the less power they have over us. For one love, one heart, one life. Namaste, everyone. And if they ever ask you to put on a breathing inhibitor again, you know what to say. No maske. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.